here. I love you all.
Hello and welcome to the Scannain Podcast, your weekly look at the world of film news, Irish International. I'm your host, Darren Mooney. Joining me are...
Grace.
And Jay.
So we're going to talk about what we normally talk about. We're going to talk about the new releases, the top 10, and the week in film news. But before we do that, we're going to talk about what we normally do. So what have we watched since last we talked? Jay?
Oh, okay. What have I watched, Darren? The answer is not a lot, actually, this week, so I'll spend 20 minutes in each one. No, I will not.
We are paying Jay by the minute, listeners.
And rightly so.
Rightly behind
Is he earning every
By the
penny?
word, more
You
like.
decide. Okay, we'll kick off. I watched Incredible Hulk, which I hadn't seen. It's one of the kind of 2 or 3 Marvel Universe films I haven't seen. The other one being Iron Man 2, which I'm probably never going to watch because I heard awful things.
Iron Man 2 gets a bad rap.
Deservedly, I heard, though, Grace. No?
Iron Man 2
Don't
is
listen to people. People are idiots.
fascinating.
When you say that, worries me, Darren.
It's absolutely fascinating. But we'll talk about that when you get to watching Iron Man 2.
Okay.
I genuinely like Iron Man 2.
I think
if
there's
that
a,
counts for anything.
I think there's a lot to like in there.
Okay.
And I think it's a better movie than a lot of the movies that have followed because it's not quite been steamrollered in some respects. You can tell that it's a very odd,
Well,
strange movie. And I think perhaps maybe in some ways related to the film we're going to talk about now.
yeah, which is terrible.
This
The
is the one
Incredible
with
Hulk is
Edward
pretty
Norton.
terrible.
Edward Norton, Tim Roth, William Hurt.
Yes.
Jabbers.
It has this extraordinarily strange opening kind of montage that feels like it's a direct sequel.
to the Ang Lee Hulk movie, which
Yeah.
isn't in canon.
And which is much better film.
The Ang Lee
Ang
Hulk is
Lee?
massively
Yeah,
Shocking.
underrated.
the Ang Lee film is great. It's
massively
genuinely
underrated.
Eric
great.
Bana.
Yes,
And Jennifer Connelly.
Yeah.
And even Sam Elliott and
Yes.
his mustache.
This is
Jesus.
this actually
And
this,
actually an attempt to use comics language
yeah,
in a
and
visual
I think
style.
it works really well.
Yeah.
For the most part, this actually has a decent enough first half hour, where it gets a really interesting chase sequence, which
The
are
favela.
it's really
Notable for having
really
one
well
of
put together.
the
You know
rare...
another movie features favelas? Fast Five.
Fast Furious 5, yeah. Fine. But,
God, I hate you people.
but no, so yeah, the favela chase sequence. And actually notable because this is one of the few... There are a handful of like Marvel scores that I remember. I remember the Driving with the Top Down from Iron Man. The original Iron Man is one of those scores that I remember. And the music that Craig
Soldier.
Armstrong uses in the favela sequences... Particularly like in that sequence you described, the opening sequence, but the chase sequence as well,
Yeah.
the sort of percussive stuff, I really, really like. And
I'm the wrong person to do musical sequences because I
Alright.
forget pretty much all of them.
Alright.
And I don't remember anything from practically any film.
Do,
I know the
do,
opening musical
do,
sequence on Raging
do,
Bull.
do,
That's pretty much it.
do,
Um,
do.
Stop, Darren, stop doing
Okay.
that.
It would help if I could.
But you know, that half hour was like such a lie though, because it's everything at that is crap.
I hate when that happens.
It's like
You just feel doubly
the
betrayed.
thinnest of characterizations across the board. The humor is so flat. Norton does his thing, and I can see why A, he was replaced, and indeed B, why he was brought in the first place, because he adds an edge to things
Yeah.
that is interesting, because Norton has that kind of slightly prickly
You can believe that Norton has a giant green
yeah,
renaissance
you
inside
absolutely
of
can,
it.
yeah. But I could see why
I believe Mark
going
Ruffalo
forward.
might stay on your couch a bit too long.
No, I can believe Ruffalo has it as well, but I think it's
Yeah.
a different play on a particular character, and I could see why Marvel wanted to go the Ruffalo
Ruffalo
route.
route, yeah.
I can, and it makes sense, and I think, in fairness to Ruffalo, I think he adds a lot of kind of natural kind of pathos to it as the films go by. I think he's very good. It's a different approach though. It's a very, and it fits with the Marvel thing.
It does. It definitely fits with the style.
But I think Ruffalo adds just enough himself to make it worthwhile. But I think Norton's one, whilst perhaps being more interesting, wouldn't have fit in the film.
And that's famously the issue with this.
Yeah.
This was an issue where, again, Ed Norton famously locked in a battle of control with the studio. We're thinking again of American History X, where he locked the director out of the
Or
ending booth.
the Italian Job, where
Yeah.
he's contractually obliged and seeds through the whole
Yeah.
film, which is remarkable to watch in
It
that regard.
really is. But Norton, apparently, big fan of the Hulk, did an uncredited rewrite on the script from scratch, put together his own edit of the film.
Yes.
This is
which
always
was,
a good sign.
Well,
But
like,
it's his previous, like
it's very much on form, and it's what you hire Norton to do.
I don't like it though. I don't like that.
I really like that. I think that's
yes, but it's an underhand thing to a certain degree, and I'm not a big fan of
Well, I mean, like,
undermining somebody you hired
Who
to
is
make the
the
goddamn
nominal
film.
director in this film?
Louis Leterrier, who
he
was
was-
famously played the role of negotiator between Marvel and Ed Norton. Apparently, by all accounts, Leterrier was apparently the guy who was trying to keep both sides happy.
Yeah, it didn't really work
Good
out.
luck with that.
Famously, the script and the film, the original Norton's cut of the film, opened with a scene in which Banner hitchhikes his way out into the middle of the Arctic, in the style of Superman 2. Remember where Superman hitchhikes his way out into the Arctic so he can find the temple or whatever and restore his powers. But it opens with a gigantic homage to that, which again is a shout out to the 70s Hulk TV show.
Yeah.
Then, after the credits are finished, Banner walks into the middle of the Arctic wastes, wanders into the middle of nowhere, falls to his knees, takes out a gun, puts it in his mouth, pulls the trigger, and transforms into the giant green Incredible Hulk. Marvel saw this and were like, not quite what we were going
Interesting though.
for. Fascinating. Well, you can tell that like Whedon ripped it off for the Avengers when
Well, he references
Ruffalo,
it,
when Ruffalo talks about putting a gun in his mouth and the green guy spitting it out, that's something lifted directly from the Norton draft. It's just fascinating.
I don't mind that he touch upon it though in that regard. Like it's an interest.
I mean, it feels incredibly
you don't own
cynical.
the god that
I know.
You know.
It doesn't feel cynical to me.
It's incredible. Like, well, okay, you're cutting this thing out of the script because you don't want it in the script, and you're like, actually, later.
There's an
we'll
interesting
take-
thing to reference something, and it's interesting to show something, and particularly if a film is in the fledgling era of
Right.
the universe. Like it's second film after Iron Man.
It was second film after Iron Man,
Uh,
famously featuring a post-credits cameo.
Yeah, not a very good one. But
When Robert Downey Jr. was still doing those things.
it's not good. There's the absolute fuckery of the computer game ending really doesn't
In
work.
Harlem as played by
poor Tim
Toronto,
Roth,
right?
and Tim Roth doing his thing. Tim Roth becomes the thing, and you forget that he's Tim Roth because he's not Tim Roth anymore. He's just a computer generated
He's
thing.
always Tim Roth.
No, I know, but it loses Tim Roth crucially, which is unforgivable to some degree because Tim Roth's good, does good intense, you know.
Yeah.
And I like that, and I like early on Tim Roth in the film where he's barely being controlled by William Hurt. It's like, oh, this is not going to go bad, you know. And the absolute waste Liv Tyler as well, which is shameful.
Yeah.
But it's not good. It's fascinating to a certain degree, and maybe not necessarily as fascinating as Darren would say fascinating. And the first half hour is worthwhile.
Yes.
But after that, it's diminishing.
It's been very much battered into a cookie cutter form.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm not sure what else you could do. I mean, I don't know where else. Like, if you're, these aren't individual films in the
I
sense
know.
of like. I mean, I'm not sure where else you could go
I mean,
with
like,
it.
later-
And Norton was probably the bad hire in that
No,
regard.
Norton definitely was a bad hire in terms of the Marvel model. And you can tell that they're still honing it at that
Yeah.
stage. Because again, this is the issue with Iron Man 2, where you have a similar conflict, where Favreau seems to have thought up until halfay through the film he was making his movie. Favreau, yeah.
Favreau, yeah.
But thought,
I kind of like Favreau now, though. I'm going to use that from now on, like I'm a French intellectual.
Um,
Yes, what you don't understand about Favreau and Jean-Luc Godard is they are great filmmakers.
But there are no Agnes Varda.
An auteur,
Yeah.
an auteur, if you will. The auteur theory of John Favreau.
Favreau.
But
Favreau on the left bank.
But he
Sorry.
thought he was making his own film until about
Yes.
halfway through. And you could tell when you're watching Iron Man 2 at which point it came down. Same thing happens with Age of Ultron as
I kind
well.
of want to watch Iron Man 2 now.
That's a great pitch.
Fuck, I
but
probably will. For the completeness of me, I'll probably end
Age
up
of
watching it at
Ultron
some
has a
point.
similar thing where you
It's
can,
worth a watch.
where you can
Alright.
tell that Whedon's like, I'm making my film, and Marvel's like, no, you're not.
You know, I just rewatched Ultron earlier today, which I will bring up later, but it holds up remarkably well in a post-Endgame world. And there's one thing that I will mention once we've all seen it, because I saw this bit earlier and I had to pause it and kind of take a
I
moment to gather
don't mind
myself.
Ultron, actually. I'm not as down on it as everybody seems to be.
Ultron is a
Well,
fascinating film.
Considering
I don't
the-
dislike it, like, but I wouldn't be going to bat for it, but I
I have
do.
been burned a lot harder by other stuff since, so
I
in
can imagine.
hindsight, I'm like, I was way too harsh on Ultron.
But
I was so innocent.
that's also a thing about a continuing film series, right? That things will influence other things, and then you'll kind of see things in a different light. That's always going to be the way.
Yeah.
But I kind of like that idea of it, I have to say.
But that's the enjoyable thing about the MCU I've always found, is that it's so good for rewatching. Like, you go back and you notice stuff that you paid no attention to at the time, that later on you're like, wait a minute, that person was much more significant.
Yeah,
than
I hope my
expected
rewatch
with
is
his
better than
one
The Incredible
throwaway
Hulk,
line. So,
generally.
yeah, well, I'm not going to watch that
No,
anytime soon.
it's.
I don't really like Ed Norton.
I do, but I can understand why people don't. You know, I think his presence in... Do you know what? The weird thing is, right? The grumpy, kind of scowling Ed Norton of kind of lore of people, what people know, is not quite... It's a bit unfortunate in some ways. Because have you ever seen Keeping the Faith, which he directed?
His directorial debut officially.
It's terrific. Like, it's one of those light as...
like screwball comedies, high concept. It's a priest and
love
a rabbi
Grace.
falling in love with the
Genuinely,
same woman.
it's Jenna Elfman
I
and
know
Ben
this
Stiller.
film.
Yeah.
It's terrific. Like,
It's
and
really
it's
good.
light in its feet. The script is terrific and really funny. And it's like
It was a different time.
I would not have expected that for Norton at all. Like, I was
No,
stunned by
like your
how
first choice. It's
light
like-
and enjoyable and
I mean, he's coming
thing.
hot from the set of American History X. Like,
Yeah.
that was his last directorial experience.
like,
Wanted something uplifting.
I was surprised by it. Well, Tony Kaye directed American History X.
I know, officially in inverted commas, famously locked
Yes,
out of the editing booth by Norton.
Poor Tony Kaye.
And I will go to bat for Norton. I much prefer Norton's
Why
interpretation of
doesn't
the Hulk to
Norton
Ruffalo's.
just say he's going to edit something instead of famously directing or locking people out of the editing room? Like, why not just come out and say, I'm going to be a big,
His
I
reputation
believe-
suffered, I have to say, a little bit.
egotistical, macho arsehole and just own it?
To be fair, I think the issue with American History X wasn't that he muscled his way in. It was that the studio closed in and they were like, we're shutting you down. And Norton was like, wait a
Well,
minute.
there is a point where you may have to support your director as well, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think, I think
Okay,
he's,
but I also,
he's an easy go-to for somebody to come in and save something.
Yeah.
And there should be a thing about that. Maybe you shouldn't do that.
Okay, I think
That's all I'd say.
like American History X, well, I don't love it as much as most people do.
I like it.
think it turned out much better than...
Yes, that's true, but also Tony Kaye made Detachment, which is excellent,
Yeah.
with Adrian Brody. So I think he's a fine filmmaker, and he probably could have done with a bit more support.
But anyway,
Anyway, yeah.
But yeah, I'll go to bat for Norton as the best Incredible Hulk, although the Incredible Hulk is not a good film.
I would go for Eric Bana, but that's a different issue.
Oh, Banner's a fair
Yeah.
shout
I
as
like
well.
Banner.
Me
Lou
too.
Fragna, baby.
I did like his little cameo, I'd say. Give
I don't-
pizza. in The Incredible.
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, we got pizza. It's like, yeah, that's all it takes them. They just give you pizza. It's like, yeah, go and walk into the security area. That doesn't make so much difference to me. But anyway, that's enough of that. I think I've talked about The Incredible Hulk quite enough. So, Varda season never ends, right? So there's one more.
There's always one more.
Mubi added a short from the 84, I think, called The So-Called Caryatids, Grace. Caryatids. My phone is cracked to hell, so it's a French...
The so-called caryatid?
Caryatid? Okay.
I guess so.
This is a little 12-minute documentary about the statues that kind of prop up buildings in Paris.
That sounds wretchedly cute.
It really is, and what's I really like about it is there's this kind of Varda doing her kind of thing where she's doing voiceover, she's music, she's really, really beautiful music, poetry in that kind of way she does, and history kind of to illuminate the kind of and it kind of is this gentle interrogation of the gender of statues that hold up buildings and why male statues are seen as strong things and women's statues are barely covering
Listeners,
themselves.
really
and-
thought you were
listeners,
gonna
you
say-
can't
that was a
see-
Hulkamania
You
type.
can't see
I really
what...
thought you were going to
yeah.
say that the men were on top of the buildings and the women were buried under
No, they were.
Sounds
They're
about right.
men are holding up buildings in an effortless kind of way,
Oh, yeah.
and women are kind of like, oh, hey up, kind of vibe off it.
I do like how Jay has sort of tailored this for an audio medium.
Well, you know, I live to give, Darren. It's really good. It's this kind of like, it's a kind of gender norms of immovable objects, which is really interesting in terms of like, have you ever looked at a building? Have you actually ever looked at a building kind of thing? And I really like that. But she's really good because she's real people are not forgotten. So there's like, you know, cut to a kind of scene of a window with two statues outside, and there's some old woman will open the window and just shake out a blanket, you know, because that's the Varda
That's
MO.
how Varda rolls, yeah.
The voiceover is really funny. The camera work is really graceful and really nice about how these things. It's like 12 minutes long. Gets in, gets out, does its thing, makes its point, and I really, really liked it. It's one of those kind of things like, oh, that's actually really beautiful, and it's actually kind of like, you know, when people talk about, you know, film what you know, or about people making film, so you can just walk around the street and pick something and go, I'm gonna make a film about that. Obviously, you need skills to do it well, or whatever, of course, like everybody knows that, but there are stories everywhere, I think is the point. Like, and I really, really liked it. It was so tender and quick and kind of almost like a souffle, you know, really light, kind of drifts by, kind of grab it quickly so you can watch it. I really, really liked it. It's very good. And Ronan will watch it. I'm not sure if he has or not, but I'm no doubt he will. And he'll probably 2 weeks from now or a week from now be kind of giving it loads about it as well, I suspect. But yeah, so finally, my last film I watched was another one of the Colombian Noirs on the Criterion channel. Of course it was. The third one of 11, I think there is.
I'm beginning to suspect you just make these things up. I have the Criterion channel, but I still believe that you're making these up.
Watch one, Darren. I've already told you two are great. Now I'm going to tell you a third one that's really good. This is Murder by Contract. Murder by Contract in 1958 noir. Really, really interesting.
I like the title.
Yeah,
it's a great title.
It's an Irvin Lerner film, which I had never really heard of, starring an actor called Vince Edwards, which I'd never really heard of. And it's this bizarre story about a killer, a contract killer, who gets a job, and he turns up at this place in LA, and he's ruthless and he's efficient, and then he's told he has to kill a woman, and he wasn't told initially that he has to kill a woman. He's just always killed men. That's just how it is. But this outfit wants a woman killed, so it becomes almost philosophical about the kind of ideas of I'll wait until the perfect time, and has this kind of really strange, fatalistic, odd kind of tone to it. I think it's only about 80 minutes long, as most of them are.
Yeah.
And it's there's this weird little play that they make in the first act that really throws the whole film off. Like a slightly unexpected kind of weirdness to it that I really loved. And then it just ramps up the action to kind of this breaking point. It just slowly builds up to the kind of pressure of, okay, you've only got 40 hours to do it. Oh, okay, you've only got 24 hours to do it. You need to kind of... And then various little plot points get in the way and things like this. It's really, really good. And there's an extraordinary last shot. And it's just... This is the third one of these I've watched, and I think I've another 8 to go. And they're absolute delights. And the idea that kind of B-list studios were knocking these out week after week almost in the kind of 40s, 50s is remarkable to me, because they're better than most films I see all the time. And it's and they're always short, which is fabulous. And they tell stories in 60, 70, 80 minutes. It's an absolute delight. I loved it.
There's a lot to be said for that kind of compact storytelling.
Yeah, it's the kind of the idea of music when in the 50s they 3-minute singles to fit the radio. You need 15 per hour with ads and stuff like that. You have to write a song in 3 minutes, boom, and then the art of that goes when you can let things go longer, and just because you can drag the cost concrete for 2 hours and 40 minutes doesn't mean you should.
All right.
Darren.
You're so
I don't know why
whether or not you could.
I don't know why you're looking at me.
Because you're the host, so I'm kind of looking at you in a kind of...
I would say that...
It did sound vaguely accusatory.
Yeah,
I did,
Darren
yeah,
is personally
I personally made drag the cost.
You are. I'm not saying you're Mel Gibson
Craig
per
Zahler,
se.
Yeah, I mean, shocking reveal. The S stands for superb.
Yes. And that means the podcast will now go on for 4 hours.
Yeah. As if it hasn't already.
I was going to say, it does usually.
But no, okay. If you're being honest, my attitude is generally make the film you want to make, and I'll judge you based on it.
But it's also cultural, though. Films used to be shorter because...
There's an interesting...
It's a budgetary thing.
There's also interesting statistics around that. It's not quite as clear-cut as that makes it sound. The bigger budget films have gotten longer, the lower budget films have gotten shorter, but the average is roughly the same as it was during the 70s.
Yeah, but big budgets, though. They rule out all, though, don't they?
Okay, all right.
But I think...
I mean, it is not as clear-cut as it... I know it's it's a thing that we complain about now, movies being too long.
I do.
But it's also
statistically,
probably
I think it's
a response probably to audience tastes as well and what they're going for. People
also
went to the cinema a lot more back in the day, and probably were. And you also had that whole setup where you sometimes would watch a B movie before the main feature and so on. So you'd have kind of shorter
kind of
pictures
newsreels
for that
and
reason.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but I think today, just like everything else, because the appetite for things has gotten much bigger and more drawn out, that has applied to a lot of filmmaking as well.
Oh, sorry. The statistics are that it's actually... It's about as long as they were in 1960. They got shorter roughly until about 1982. Then they started getting longer again. But yeah, it's not an abnormal
So
phenomenon.
82, so when I was 7, they started getting longer. The sons of bitches.
But when they were 7, they were the shortest that they've been
downhill since
1950.
Yeah, well, I wasn't alive in 1950, Darren. I mean, what good's that to me?
Right. Well, you can be now, thanks to the Criterion
But
channel.
thankfully, everything should be a Vard or less. We've stated this. I've stated it. 80 minutes, thank you, and good night.
All right.
But that's me.
I generally prefer films to err on the shorter side, just because
You can watch more of them.
Yeah, well, you can watch more of them, and I think it's rare, unless it's really an exceptional story that requires more indulgence and more time to breathe, then I think generally films tend to be a bit better for more economical storytelling.
Yes.
But that's not an absolute rule.
No,
obviously.
of course not. I mean, there's many 3, 4, 5 hour films
Mm-hmm.
that I love. Like
Also, because my attention span as I get older is shocking.
that only
Truly
gets worse,
shocking.
Grace. It only gets worse.
So, yeah, if something's like 2.5 hours long and I have a choice between that and a film that's 90 minutes long, I'm nearly always going to go for the 90-minute one.
Sorry, apologies. I misread the statistics there. It was the 25 most popular films that are as long now as they were in 1960. If you look at the films that are rated on IMDb in general, they're actually shorter. The average film today is shorter. It's a little graph. You can.
I don't care about your graph, Darren.
Jay rejects the
I
graph and
reject.
inserts his own.
Fake news, Darren.
All right.
Sorry.
There's always a political dimension.
Thank
to
you, Luke,
this.
if you're listening, for making me sick, by the way. Thank you, Luke. We really appreciate that from last week.
All right.
He's going to tweet you about this.
Yeah.
Yes. You want to hear all about it, Luke?
All right. So, Grace, what have you watched since last we talked?
Not very much. Aside from, the big kahuna, which we will talk about later, I watched The Shallows at the weekend, which was not bad. I mean, just because I'm always the resident killjoy in these things, I do have a moral objection with films that demonize sharks, because sharks are murdered in outrageous numbers every year for absolutely no reason.
But you love Jaws,
and you're
right?
also yeah, I love Jaws, but Jaws is different
How is it?
because it's from back in the day.
Grandpa exception.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Jeez.
yeah, no, this wasn't bad. I mean, it was. I suppose I don't really like Blake Lively very much, and I am that annoying person who, if I don't really like an actor, it's hard for me to
You have to invest, like, so
put
I
up
can
the
see
rest
that.
of the film.
I kind of liked
But,
it, and I didn't really know Blake Lively.
No, I mean, it was
at all.
interesting. It was different, as far as,
It's not a bad
Shark
idea. I like the
movies can
concept,
go.
and I like
I
the idea.
admired the film's commitment to what it was
Yeah.
doing. Like, the shark
And the
is
fairness
impossible
of
to
the
kill.
storytelling when you have just a single character. And, finding ways for her to interact with
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
and to convey, progress and,
Steven
all that sort of
Seagal.
stuff. And
Give her
Steven
Wilson.
Seagal, which is properly class.
Yeah.
And also, I did enjoy that these sharks were a bit like the sharks from, the shark, I think there was only one.
There's a-
Bit like the sharks from Deep Blue Sea, where they just kill indiscriminately. And so, some surfers are like chilling and hanging out and she's trying to get their attention, and then the shark literally just swallows them
Isn't
whole.
the shark kind of fixated on her, from what I remember?
It seems that way. Like it has a personal vendetta
pretty hot,
against
though.
her.
Well, okay. I was thinking also she
Joking,
scars it
I'm
as well.
joking.
Yeah.
She does scar it, but again, I my takeaway from the film, I really enjoyed the film, is the level of sheer commitment that I admired from the shark. There's a point at which you sort of go gambler's fallacy. It's like, just go eat it. Like, it's gorging on a killer whale when it's introduced, from what I remember.
Yeah, there's
isn't
a
it?
dead whale just kind of floating,
It's like, just
beached offshore.
go back there. It's like, you gave it a good shot. She's really, like, it is going to hurt you more. But you reach the point where stuff is exploding, and you're like, well, okay, I admire commitment. Follow through.
I
You've
think
got good
sharks can be
follow-through.
quite single-minded like that. But yeah, no, it wasn't bad. I don't think there was that much to recommend it, but it was entertaining enough for like an hour and a half or so.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And
It
then
was a shallow pleasure, was it?
Oh, Jesus.
it was all right to leave on in the background on the Saturday night at home.
Indeed.
That's what I mean. Anyway, what else did I watch? Oh yes, I saw Infinity War. Yes, I'm getting mixed up between the two. Last night as part of the double bill with Endgame, which I really want to talk about, but I'm finding it hard to talk about without mentioning things about Endgame, so I can't really say anything. Talking about Endgame is also going to be difficult because there's a lot I want to talk about that I can't say. Because
Well, I mean, it'll be in the top 10
it's
forever.
spoilery.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be top 10 this summer.
Yeah, and I will probably have seen it like 14 times, so I'll just keep coming back with, and another thing.
Yes.
But I will say that I think... Now, I've seen Infinity War several times, even before last night, and always found it quite heavy on the feels, but last night was particularly bad. There was a lot of sobbing. And that was before we got on to the rest of the sobbing.
Good
so
Lord.
I feel like, yeah.
Subtastic.
Well, I'm a very nostalgic person, and when you're staring the end of a 10-year journey right in the face, that's a lot. It's a lot. So,
God, I can't remember 10 years ago. Anywho.
I can.
Robert Downey Jr. was uninsurable.
Good Lord, that was true, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Remember when?
He was found in strange people's homes. God, that was a weird time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway.
I just remember seeing on the news when he was sent to prison that time. Fast forward a few years.
Now just back in
How come we never
prison
came up
trucks
with a
full of money
name
for him.
for
Back to
his renaissance? The same way we did for
yeah.
McConaughey.
Because I don't think McConaughey was on the scale of this. Which is interesting because, again, Downey Jr. is sort of like, he's tried to branch out. He's done stuff like, say, the Due Date, the Todd Phillips movie. He's done things like The Judge with Robert Duvall and stuff like that. 7 hours. But the thing with Downey Jr. is that, like, he's been phenomenally successful in large part due to this role, but he hasn't really branched out beyond it. Like, the Downey naissance, if we're going to call it that, extends to Iron Man, which is big enough for it to be a career revival.
He did some really interesting stuff back in the day when he was younger.
He was amazing back in the day. Like,
fine actor.
He's one of the finest young actors. Amazing with like that variety between comedy and drama.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Chaplin is not a great film, but I thought he was really good in it.
Things like Wonder Boys as well, he's very good in, and things like that. I liked him as an actor.
And even in Ally McBeal, I thought he was very good as well.
Oh, Ally McBeal.
The worry I always have, though, and I like the Marvel Universe, and I'm not being disparaging at all, but I always kind of never a big fan of holding actors. Now, they get paid. I'm not suggesting they're being held against gunpoint, but I always want to see people doing other work outside of things like that. And Downey Jr. being an example of it. You'd wonder if the performance of the last decade that may or may not have.
The thing is,
it's not like he's doing good work. I'm
not entirely sure that, like, for Downey Jr. it's an either or situation.
No. And then I should say to some degree that's. Like, I mean, if you look at the top level ones, you're probably talking the same.
Chris Evans as well. Chris Evans has made a point to do other stuff while he's there as well, which I think has been more experimental than stuff Downey Jr. has been doing.
Yeah, plus there's probably an argument to be made, like in all things, that when you do films like that and you get a multi-film deal as well, you get a certain level of, I imagine, financial security,
no doubt,
which enables you to go and pursue other things that may not necessarily pay you particularly well, or indeed take that money and make something of your own.
Yeah, I know Evans done Broadway stuff and off-Broadway stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, even his film work.
He's directed a film as well, I think, that nobody's seen.
Yeah. It's on Netflix.
Is it?
It is.
Did you watch it?
I have not watched it.
I'm shocked you haven't watched it.
I know. I keep meaning to watch it, but yeah.
Is it like 95 minutes long, so too long?
It is. Chris? No, it is. Genuinely about 95 minutes long. So I think Heather's watched it and she liked it. But she likes
curious
rom-coms,
to know now.
So.
I like rom-coms. So.
There you go. Away you go.
I'm on it.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I have nothing else to add. Genuinely, I haven't watched anything else.
I am out of here.
All right. Yep. So I had a very packed week, so we'll run through it very quickly. I was at the Avengers double bill screen last night. I wussed out because it was a school night and I didn't go and see Endgame twice, but I've seen it already, so we'll talk about that later. Infinity War is interesting because people keep talking about it like it's this big emotional movie. For me, it's always been a series of cogs moving in one very clear narrative direction. And none of the characters seem to have any agency in it, and that's always really bothered me, is that, like, none of the characters make any significant choices that affect the outcome of the narrative. And they all tend to sound rather similar as well. There's, like, a moment early in the film where Doctor Strange, in the space of 10 minutes, is compared to a street magician who works at children's parties by both Tony Stark and the Ebony Maw. Tony Stark being an American tech bro entrepreneur billionaire, and the Ebony Maw being the ghastly alien forebearer of a democidal maniac. They should probably have two different frames of reference.
I'm happy to see Doctor Strange getting slapped down.
No, I know, and it's
every
not that.
Time by everyone.
It's not that, but it's the idea that, like, the go-to insult for him from two characters with two completely different frame of references is, well, you're a children's magician.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, but it kind of
audience is kind of young, though. I mean, I think when you're writing these films, you have to be aware of that. They're giving them references they can work with.
But I mean, and it's the same thing with, like, the scene with, say,
they probably could have come out with something a lot more insulting that would not have been fit to print.
But I mean, even things like, say, the scene with, Tony Stark, Peter Quill, and Peter Parker on the surface of Titan, where you've got three deadpan snarkers snarking at each other in quick succession. And you could take almost any line from that scene and assign it to any other character in that scene, and it would play exactly the same way.
I disagree. I don't think you could.
Like, I mean, there's the bit
they may have similar characteristics, I think, individually, but they each have a certain style of going about it.
Well, I mean, they
both have different stakes in it at that stage too. All three of them, which makes it different.
The only character who is marginally different is Cumberbatch's Strange, and that's largely because he's written around Cumberbatch as opposed to being.
But he's also not participating
in that conversation either, as well, which is the problem. It just like it feels very cold, very arch, very like everything moves in exactly the way it needs to move. None of the characters make choices. Like, there's a moment where Banner shows up and he's like, Tony, you have to call Steve. It's meant to be a big moment because obviously Steve and Tony had a big falling out, and there's a lot of bad blood between them. And Tony takes out the phone, and it's like, will he call him, or is he going to not call him? Does he have this like sense of pride or chip on his shoulder that will prevent him from doing this? And will this become a grand tragedy? And the movie's like, well, we're not actually going to answer that question because that would involve the character making a choice. So the Ebony Maw and a bunch of random people show up in New York and interrupt the scene.
But it's not literally every film, though, right?
Yeah,
I mean, every blockbuster does a variation of that.
Yeah. Plus, to my mind, the thing that really stands out for me, and we'll come back to this when we talk about the film that followed it. The thing that really stood out to me about Infinity War now, in hindsight, is that it doesn't stop for breath at any stage. You take all these characters and you dump them into a situation that, for once in their lives, they cannot control at all. So I don't think the element of choice is that important. They're reacting to things.
But again, like the whole
they're
point
no longer in
yeah
the supreme kind of
and they're having to react to things at a much faster pace and in a way that they have not had to previously, because they are meant to be Earth's mightiest heroes, and this is supposed to be all about them being disarmed and disempowered.
But even then, like, the whole point is how you react to something is also a definition of character. And you have scenes like, for example, the sequence where Strange tells Tony that he would happily let Peter Parker die rather than give up the stone.
Which again doesn't do it later.
Which sets up, like, a nice character beat and a sense of conflict between the two guys involved. And potentially the three guys if you're going to count him. If you're going to count Peter. And then the film says, actually, turns out he saw a future, so he's going to give up the stone because he has to, because it's predetermined. It's really cynical and borderline nihilistic. And it just feels...
I would agree with nihilistic, but I don't think it's cynical.
I don't think it's cynical
in the sense that it's inevitable.
Yeah.
What I actually liked about Infinity War, and I am no expert, I've only seen it... have I seen it twice? I have no idea. Anyway, what I did like about it, and weirdly, I was not a Thanos fan before this film, like, as the concept or the...
I don't think anyone was.
Yeah, and so I was kind of going along for the ride to a certain degree. But there's a kind of sad, weird energy that's brought to the film by him, and this is what I like about it. And it's not necessarily about the narrative cheat, or whatever you want to call it, at the end of the film, which is, I think, it's justifiable in and of itself because it's a film and it ends at a certain point. But there's this kind of like inevitability that I'm going to win because I'm going to win, right? And I'm not saying you're disputing that or not.
No.
Right? I'm not
in fact, the most interesting thing about Thanos is that he becomes an embodiment of the idea of death or forces outside the narrative. I am inevitable.
But I like that, though. And I like I think even Brolin plays well, and I think even how the character is kind of drawn in that regard is a kind of tired win, which has this kind of melancholy weirdness to it that adds a huge amount to the last act, which in the general Marvel last act stuff that goes on, which I don't particularly have a huge amount of time for in general terms, I think it adds a huge amount to it. And I like the whole bit after it with the snap and whatever. I'm not going to go into it, but that's a kind of cherry on top. And I don't know anything about the comic lore or the whole thing of it, so it doesn't really matter to me, and I don't really care. It either works in the film or it works, and it worked in the film for me. And I'm aware that I haven't seen Endgame because I was sick, thank you, Luke, and I was going to go see it last night, but I will see it by the weekend. But I don't expect everybody that disappeared in that film to
remain
or forever. And I understand how films work. I understand how two-parters work, which is essentially what we're talking about.
It also had this specific universe.
And exactly. I mean, that's fine. Like, I mean, I think, and I felt an relatively emotional connection to the end of Infinity War, which really surprised me because I wasn't expecting any bit of it.
Okay, and the thing is, every single part of that just felt like it clicked into place. Like, again, the fact the original 6 Avengers.
But you make that sound like it's a bad thing, though.
No,
I think it's.
I think it works really well in that regard.
I think it's important to note as well that Infinity War was one half of a culmination of 10 or 11 years of work, and there was always a sense of inevitability around Thanos, and that he was always someone who was going to be too big and too much. And
despite the fact that
there was never any evidence that they were ever going to be able to overcome him. And I think they started building up to that in previous films, though. I mean, they had Thor and Ragnarok go up against someone that he physically could not overcome, no matter how much he did, and he had to basically feed her to a planet-devouring demon to get rid of her. So it's not like they haven't been up against that kind of inevitability of defeat stakes before. But I think with Thanos in particular, what struck me about him in Infinity War is the fact that he does not visibly take any delight in anything that he's doing. Like, he doesn't do it because he's a homicidal maniac. In his own head, he has very serious, potent reasons for doing what he does. And then when you get to the
empty, sad, weird reasons.
Yeah, like, but when you get to the end,
and I like that
in
a blockbuster.
Yeah, when you get to the end of the film and it cuts to him just like in this kind of garden, for want of a better word, and he's just kind of sitting there looking very sober and
It's grim, like.
and resigned.
And,
it
the hollowest of victories in a
Because
real way, like.
the way that he was built up over many films was that people talked about him almost as if he was like some sadistic murderer who was just doing all this for the Jonix, basically. And then you get to Infinity War and you discover that he's someone who actually thinks and considers things and has a perspective, and as much as we may not agree with it and it may be morally very, very questionable, I did like Thanos for the fact that it was like he had a sort of a sense of duty to what he was doing, but it was not something that he did for enjoyment. There was no sense of celebration or victory around what he did. It just felt like something that had to be done.
The weird thing about Thanos is that, like, his motivation is absolutely ridiculous and absurd and makes absolutely no sense. And
it makes sense to me.
Okay, he plans to wipe out half the life on Earth randomly, half the life in the universe randomly, which will cause, at best, the complete collapse of ecosystems.
The universe is finite. The resources are finite.
Yep.
Too many beings use too many resources. Yep. I understand where he's coming from.
Best case scenario, you're in this situation a good 1,000 years, couple of thousand years down the line again, and nothing happens. Worst case scenario is like what would happen in real life if you removed half the population from a random ecosystem. The entire thing will collapse because it's built on sort of like matches and stuff like that, which is grand. It doesn't matter. Your supervillain plan doesn't have to be smart or make sense. I don't mind that. That's not the issue. The issue is the weird level of seriousness with which the film treats it, because it feels like Marvel were going, hey, well, Doctor Doom is at Fox, Magneto's at Fox, and those are like the big tragic villains that we have in inverted commas.
I kind of disagree, because Doctor Doom is kind of shite.
Doctor Doom is
never
shit.
really worked.
In cinema he
so
is.
I'm kind of okay with that.
In cinema he is, but generally perceived as being. But Magneto in cinema is like the go-to.
Yeah, also we've seen like 500 films.
We have seen 500,
so
and the reason you've seen 500 films with Magneto is because he's a villain who has actual motivations and whatever. And
no, it's because Fox have X-Men and they'll flog it till it's dead, which they've done.
Yes, but Magneto as a character is compelling.
Yes,
in a way that a lot of villains
the Marvel
are not.
Studio villains aren't. And there's a very clear sense with Thanos that they're doing that. The issue with Thanos for me, and it's weird, and it kind of gets at this, is although his like motivation makes no sense, the film fetishizes his pursuit of power in a way that is absolutely fascinating. Like, the only thing that's interesting about Thanos is his single-minded pursuit of like power at absolutely all costs. And the film's weird decision to play this as some grand tragedy of the man. Like, what he's going to use the power for is incredibly stupid, but the fact that he wants it, and he wants it so bad, makes him this huge tragic figure, which is fascinating.
But isn't it a reckoning, no? That's what I always thought it. He's a reckoning, like.
Oh yeah, well he's...
But, like, the fact is, like, that, you know, you can get rid of half the world or whatever, like, surely by his own thing he could get rid of all the world if he wants to. Like, I like the idea of half as a kind of random number generator.
Oh no,
like, you know, the experimental weirdness of the whole thing, which works really well for me.
And Thanos works reasonably well as a metaphor for all the stuff that's happening outside the narrative. He's a force. He's inevitable. He's actors' contracts expiring. He's actors passing away. He's actors drifting out of the franchise.
That's
he's all the
very
things.
cynical.
He's all the things.
If you want to look at it that way, instead of the embodiment of like inevitable environmental apocalypse, which is obviously the allegory I went to.
But he is, because it's the end of the Avengers. Like, and the large part of it is that our contracts are expiring. We're running out of these people. We have to deal with the fact that we're not comic books.
But Infinity War, I think, brings that.
I think everyone sitting in the cinema who was in tears after Endgame was definitely thinking, yes, this is all because an actor's contract has expired.
Okay, well,
very upset about this.
Darren, I understand that you're a monster and have no emotional feeling, right? We all understand that.
Okay.
But
I just think you look at this in an incredibly detached way. It's not that what you say doesn't have some merit, but I think you need to allow for the level of investment
that other people may have.
I do, and
but also I feel like the filmmakers are genuinely invested in this. Like, I don't think this is a massively cynical studio as studios go.
Okay.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do think
I think
as I
they
said,
care
it's a culmination
about their
thing,
characters
and
and
the
their
culminating
properties
support
in a very specific way.
Okay. We'll probably talk about it in the coming weeks. Very quickly, though, because I'm not a monster, and because because I do have feelings, Jay, and because I'm wary of people being like, Darren's got this weird thing against Marvel Studios. I actually watched a couple of Marvel Studios films which are great and which I loved. Guardians of the Galaxy was on television, so I watched through that. That's amazing. It's great fun. It's the best Marvel Studios film.
No, it's not.
It's the one that actually has a unique vision, unique creative talent.
I hate Peter Quill.
And it's got
That's all I gotta say about that.
Like, the thing about Guardians is that it's got this thing where it's actually about something more than the inevitability of actors' contracts expiring. But
Do you know why though? Because he thought it was going to be just a cheap ass knock it out, and then it was successful.
Yeah.
Nobody expected it. It was just one of those low budgeting. Which I keep saying Star Wars should do.
it.
You should listen to me because I know what I'm talking about.
Keep
Maybe
doing
I don't.
But I mean, it is. It's a great example of like giving a director freedom and a bunch of characters nobody cares about, and letting him do what he wants with them.
But they wouldn't have done that if they thought it was going to be a success.
I know. But still,
It's okay.
And it works remarkably well. And it's got this simple through line of this idea of a kid dealing with the loss of his mother.
With that awful first scene, one of the worst first scenes in any Marvel film.
I think
ever.
That is pretty heavy.
Horrible.
It's
I thought
one
it
of the
was
best.
dreadful.
It's one of the most
Absolutely
effective.
dreadful.
It
It's
actually
bluntly awful.
It is bluntly awful, but at least it settles an emotional score. And the position of it before the credits sequence underscores the idea that the entire movie is like a metaphor for Peter dealing with the loss
I don't
of his
like
mother.
Peter. That's all.
Okay, that's grand. But again, this idea of a cosmos which is funny,
I
but
like
filled
Groot,
with
though.
dead, and this sort of weird like Wizard of Oz thing where a boy drifts off into space and he finds in rapid succession, the daughter of Thanos, who is basically a princess, an insanely literal-minded green man, a talking anthropomorphic raccoon, and a tree. And they
Dave
embark on
Bautista is the
adventures together.
MVP in that film.
He
He's
really
fantastic.
is. He's fantastic. Also, another film I watched, Thor Ragnarok, which is amazing. It's really great.
It's fun.
the
I do like it.
Best
but
of the Phase 3 by a significant distance.
It really isn't.
It's amazing.
I like Ragnarok a lot, but I do think Ragnarok has been overpraised.
It's,
I'd probably be similar. I like it, but
Like, it's very good, but
It's very
I
enjoyable, but
don't see stars into
somewhat
the next universe the
disposable.
way everyone else does.
And again, it's a movie that's about something. It's very much playing with these themes of colonialism, of like appropriation, of this idea of legacy, of violence, of
Tessa
systems
Thompson.
that are built up. It's got Tessa Thompson. It's got a fantastic
That's
cast.
a story,
Even Taika Waititi, even playing Korg is fantastic.
I do
as
like
well.
Korg, I'd say.
Jeff Goldblum is amazing. The entire
Jeff Goldblum is not amazing.
I could probably take it.
I mean,
Jeff Goldblum.
they
I
I'll
like
take
Jeff
him.
Goldblum, but in this I just thought he was kind of there.
I
Even
don't
the
know if I
wonderful
like him anymore.
sequence where it's like it's a small world after all, as Thor is being introduced to like the logic of like again, Sakara.
No, you enjoyed it. I'm not suggesting for a second you didn't. But most people do think you hate Marvel, Darren. You're a shill for DC or whatever you do.
Really? Okay.
No, I'm joking. No, I don't know. I'm only kidding.
But yeah, I love Thor Ragnarok, and I think Thor Ragnarok does these big ideas.
I think the
better
first
than...
Avengers is the best film Marvel ever produced.
Oh,
I
interesting.
think
But there
Winter
you go.
Soldier is by some distance.
Interesting.
Okay. Anyway, bunch of other stuff that I watched, which is
Hit me.
also great. So rapid fire round. Tropic Thunder happened to be on.
I like Tropic Thunder.
I have a huge soft spot for Tropic Thunder. I haven't
What do
seen
you
it in
mean by
years.
you people?
What do you mean, you people? And it's kind of amazing, in large part because I wonder if it could get made today.
No, it probably couldn't.
And whether or not that's a bad
Simple
thing.
Jack
But
would never get us a trailer,
It
would
would
never
be
fly.
savaged
And
instantaneously.
Satan's
the
Alley
inter-
probably wouldn't get
on
it on either.
every platform.
the internet would loathe it, which is ironic because like watching it today, it feels even more like the Kirk Lazarus thing is even more absurd after Ghost in the Shell.
I think it stands up pretty well, weirdly, and even though it wouldn't, I think it's funny. Like I laughed all the way through when it was on the cinema. I rewatched a couple of years ago, and I still found it really funny.
And even though like it would be out of place today for those reasons, like it's incredibly. It feels like it arrived too early for meme culture.
It arrived at the only time it could have arrived, though. I think you know.
Yeah. But I mean, like, imagine how many gifs of Tom Cruise would be filling your timeline at the moment.
But the
or like,
Cruise stuff was the
Not very few
least
of them.
successful bit of it for me, even though I quite enjoyed it. I like the trailers.
the false trailers
The
are
false trailers are
fantastic.
incredible.
And I mean, what's amazing, what I really think works about it, which is massively underrated, is Stiller's use of dramatic actors in comedic roles.
Yeah.
Obviously, you think Cruise is the least successful, but I think he works
No,
really
he's
well.
good. No,
But
he's fine.
McConaughey,
The section doesn't work, but
McConaughey is surprisingly good, and in large part.
I don't remember McConaughey.
Some of the jokes.
No, I actually
He's the agent. He's Tug Speedman's agent, and like some of the stuff works in large part
Clearly,
because
I haven't seen
Stiller
this in
asks
years.
him to play it incredibly straight. So you have this absurd montage moment where he's got to decide whether or not he's going to like betray his friend or sort of like stand by his friend. And it's shot in this sort of like slow motion montage of the sun setting, McConaughey looking really sad, while in one hand he has a picture of himself and Ben Stiller, and in the other hand he has a magazine helpfully titled G5 Private Jet Owner. And it's just beautiful because, again, like McConaughey's playing this relatively straight. Even Nick Nolte.
I love Nick Nolte.
As the special effects
Yeah,
guy
he's
who
great.
lies about having hooks.
And Steve Coogan is all doing good work.
What's the, again, mimetic line where it's like, I don't know the name of it. I only know the sound it makes when it lies, which is fantastic as well.
No, I like Tropic Thunder, I'd say. I do.
Also, very quickly, watch Zombieland, which is grand. I never really got the praise for it. It's solid.
It's
got
the
a
whole
good
Bill
cast.
Murray thing, isn't it? Like,
Yeah. Well,
Bill Murray's the weakest part of that film.
It's the
I
Bill
think
Murray
Zombieland's
thing
great fun.
the Bill Murray thing is a bit, similar to the Jeff Goldblum thing. It's like it needs to
Yeah,
kind
the
of go away a
Bill
little
Murray
bit.
thing I've never gotten ever.
I like Zombieland to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I think it's
the cast is
very
charming.
fun.
I prefer
It's really
Adventureland.
enjoyable.
If we're going to talk
Wait, if you're talking about Emma Stone and Jesse Eisenberg collaborations, right?
I like Adventureland.
Oh no, Adventureland was Kristen Stewart.
Yeah.
Apologies. But yeah, then also rewatched Star Trek, which is remarkable because it seemed to hark back to an innocent time.
Which Star
2009,
Trek?
the
Oh,
2009 J.J. Abrams one. In large part
I
because
like that too.
I like that a lot.
imagine, like, again, that was before the internet had realised it could just explode into a pile of hatred. There's a
Really?
little simmering ambience there of people being like, well, it's not my Star Trek. But you hadn't yet reached the into
Hasn't been
darkness level
weaponised.
of, boom, yeah, it hadn't been sort of like weaponized and sort of turned against it.
God,
So you had
that's
this
a
thing,
terrible thing, isn't it?
yeah, you had this moment where, like, Star Trek fans could be, well, it's not the Star Trek I like, but new people were like, hey, this is great, I'm really enjoying
Also,
this.
there's 500 episodes that I do like. It's just over there, like, I'm
Yeah.
watching because I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
an
that was
internet
me.
idiot.
I was like, this was really enjoyable. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll watch some Star Trek. No, I won't. That's a huge commitment. And even then, when they put Next Generation on Netflix, 7 years later, I watched 9 episodes.
Yeah,
maybe?
but you started with the first season.
Why would I
Nobody
not
would-
start at the beginning?
I have
'Cause
to.
it's
I have to start at
terrible.
the start though.
It's-
I can't skip season. I
Yeah.
know people told me
Even
that.
arrived at you've been past the Planet of the Black People episode,
Yes.
but you haven't arrived at the
Ugh.
Planet of the Women episode. Oh yeah, Gene Roddenberry was all over this bad boy.
Oh, Jesus,
Yeah,
okay.
he was all up.
Nobody
in it.
tells you about that
This
in the
is
brochures.
1988, Jay. 1988, and we're
I remember
doing
this on TV.
I
We
were
have
doing-
liked the episodes I've seen so far.
Alright.
I don't understand
Wow.
why everyone.
I'd have
thinks
to start
they're crap.
season 1 though as well. I can't skip. I can't.
Okay. I do like when they talk to like
Like
Brent.
the first Fast and Furious, right?
No, but it's
Anyway.
enjoyable to see something grow into itself.
Isn't
When they
it?
talk to Brent Spiner about Star Trek The Next Generation, he's like,
Yeah.
well, at least we got most of our racism out very quickly. And you're like, well, that's probably the best way to look at it, Brent.
Well, if you're going to do your races, get it out done. Get it
out
in
of the
front
way,
of
I
it. Like,
think it's-
yeah,
that's it exactly.
That's probably fair.
And then
Jesus.
also Black 47, which is good. My favourite Irish movie last year. I know,
I
Rosie,
like-
you preferred, and obviously you didn't
That's because
commit,
better.
so-
But
Hi-yo.
I really like Black 47 as well.
Yeah.
I did.
And again, the construction's fantastic. Lance Staley's direction, the use of sound. Airplane was on, and which was also, again, has surpassed many of the movies that it was openly sort of mocking and playing with.
I love Airplane.
Like, it's like
I also love
transcended.
Airplane too,
Yeah.
which is the same film, but it doesn't really matter
Same
because
film,
they're
but
the
with
same
William
jokes
Shatner.
and everything else is William Shatner. They're both ridiculous.
I don't think I've ever seen Airplane.
It's good. It's of its time. Some of
Yes.
the jokes are
Have not aged
Yeah,
particularly well.
well, it falls into that list of films that I've imbibed enough of from cultural
from other,
osmosis that I
But
don't
I
really
do like
feel a need to
Airplane though.
watch
There's
it.
like 1,000 jokes in it, so even if you don't like this one, there's 5 more within 10
That's
seconds.
exactly the
and
density
so many
of
of
it.
them work that
Yeah.
it's well
And I
worth
mean-
watching.
And also,
And
like,
I
some you
wonder
won't
if they
know.
would work in context
I-
now.
they would.
Because
I think
I've
you'd be
heard
fine with it.
so many of them.
I think there's a lot like my favourite one is like, I'd get this guy to a hospital. What is it? It's a big building with patience, but that's not important right now.
or even the sequence. There's like, and a lot of this is down to the filmmaking is surprisingly good.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's
There's
sharp.
like one of my favorite jokes in it, which is one that nobody ever talks about, is the moment where Robert Stack stands in front of a mirror putting his tie on, and then steps through the mirror, which is just amazing.
Or when he's talking at the end of it, it's like, municipal bonds, Ted. Starts going into this kind of life
Stream of
advice kind of
consciousness,
weird
yeah.
stuff, which I really love.
Or even the bit where, like, where he's talking on the radio and he sort of takes a dab but leaves his thumb on, and it's like, it's a good thing he doesn't know that I hate his guts. It's really good.
I think the bed week to give up sniffing glue.
Yeah.
And so on.
And it holds up remarkably well, and it's
I think
aged
it's
better
great.
than most of the movies it's directly spoofing, which is interesting. So
Yeah.
you've got this weird thing where it's displaced them in pop culture.
There's a weird kind of the 80s kind of spoof comedies, which the Zucker Brothers were a huge part of, like of Kentucky
I think,
Fried
like,
Movie and
yeah.
various other things like that.
Would even Hot Shots be part of that? Of the
Yeah,
later end?
well, no, it would be to some degree.
I love Hot
And Top Secret, which is fantastic.
Top Secret it is massively underrated,
yeah.
and has a good Val Kilmer performance.
Yeah, but they're kind of that kind of lots of boobs wobbling in planes,
Yeah.
that kind of that's
Yeah.
the
It's not maybe
80s.
aged
The
just
80s were
yeah.
literally all of that's all the 80s were like. As a teenager, it was very strange time. I have to say. Yeah. But they're good though. But you have to remember this the 80s.
Yeah. And two more very quickly. The Mule, in which Clint Eastwood has again buried the lead last time I covered it, so I'm just getting
Clint
out in
Eastwood,
front of
stop saying "bury the lead" when he has a threesome, right? Stop saying that
it.
phrase.
2 threesomes.
Bury the lead is not a phrase.
second-
An 89 or whatever age he is, man. And
The
stop.
second one he
Stop.
interrupts in order to give life advice to the son or adopted son of a cartel drug
I'm
lord.
gonna have to watch this.
It's
aren't
kind of amazing. He's like, you gotta find something you love doing
I? Like
and
threesomes.
do it. Yeah.
Oh God, I have to watch this. But I'm also
I
appalled
kind
by
of
the
like
idea.
it. Like, I mean, it's not a good movie, but it kind of, the charm just sort of gets me. There's this weird Eastwood
Ronan
thing.
still has seen this, has he?
Which
And
is
he's
amazing
he's
for an
the
Eastwood
Eastwood
film,
stan,
yeah.
like, I want to see him to watch it, so I.
There's a point at
here.
the end where, like, he's sentenced. And, like, his character's position is that he's not being sentenced for running massive amounts of cocaine into Chicago. He's being sentenced for being a bad husband and father. I'm guilty, Your Honor. Guilty. And it's like, well, technically we're not sentencing you for that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, sure,
since
why
you made
not?
us a good case for it. But it's really good. And
You
again,
are Clint Eastwood.
yeah, Clint Eastwood playing Jimmy Stewart, which is kind of fascinating as well of itself.
God, it sounds weird.
And finally, Catch Me If You Can, which is great. I'd happily accept this as the last great Spielberg film, although I would argue Munich and
I would
have a
argue-
soft spot for Lincoln.
I like Catch Me If You Can, right? But controversy, I never considered it a great Spielberg film.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I like it. Like, I enjoy it, but I always found it kind of disposable.
Okay, it's got that sort of like Americana
It's
thing that
light,
Spielberg
and it's
does.
lovely on its feet and all that, and
Yeah.
it's stylish as all hell.
Yeah,
But
and
I
it's got
never
that...
quite connected it in the way
yeah.
that I thought it would.
It's got that again, that American sort of fixation on like con artists.
Oh,
and
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of like, which is, and
Making
again,
your
this idea
way
of myth
and all that.
making
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
yeah.
this idea of the myth of the self-made man, and it's got all that stuff again. New Hollywood had that sort of stuff with stuff like Paper Moon, for example, but even things like to pick another couple of random examples. I'm trying to think, but there were a whole spate of like con man movies and things like that, and The Sting, yes, that's the one I was thinking of as well. But yeah, things like that. But the thing with Catch Me If You Can is it's infused with this melancholy as well, the strange longing, the strange nostalgia.
Yeah, it's the
Again,
father-son kind of thing.
which is the Spielberg thing as well. But even then, there's the sense of like running out of ground underneath him as well. The idea that like there was a time maybe when, as an American, you could be a self-made person if you lied through your teeth and were inventive and resourceful enough.
Like all the Americans did.
Well, but the idea that like the con artist as a mythical American figure, like the cowboy,
Like
the superhero,
carved the Indians out of their land.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
But also the idea of
No, but
navigating.
they literally did.
No,
Spielberg's
I know.
very aware of that,
Yeah.
like, in fairness.
Yeah.
Like,
And again, there's this melancholy that runs through it that differentiates it from a lot of other sort of like, again, light on your feet. And you're right, it is incredibly light on its feet. Con man stories. Which
but I think the performances are very good. Hanks and
DiCaprio is great,
Yeah.
and Hanks is as ever amazing.
Yeah. Hanks is dependable as all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's
Like,
playing. He's playing an incredibly dependable
I would
character.
say I much prefer Munich. I think it's a much more interesting film and a much better film in a lot of ways, bar that scene, which should not.
One of the most incredible sex scenes in cinema history.
The worst sex scene that's ever been put on film.
One of the most, to use a very Darren word, fascinating sex scenes ever captured in cinema history.
It's the worst sex scene that's ever been in cinema.
All right. So yeah, that about
Oh my
wraps.
God, it creeps me out thinking about it.
I've seen Munich and I don't remember this.
You don't remember the head
You've repressed
splashback
it.
bit?
No.
Oh my God.
Clearly, I was not paying enough attention, or else I
Grace,
just forgot it instantaneously.
One scene I always thought it would never be forgotten, but alas.
All right.
Well, apparently it can be.
Let's move on to talk about the weekend film news. Relatively light week in terms of news. It seems like it's the calm before the storm, metaphorically speaking.
Okay.
Spielberg has made good with Netflix, apparently.
Has he?
Yeah.
Which movie did you give him?
Truce has been declared. Well, apparently, yep, he's developing programs for them as well. But yeah, so all has been
Go on,
smoothed
Steve.
over.
Well, that's great.
The Oscars are moving back 2 weeks as well. There was some suggestion.
What's it, like the middle of February?
Yeah, and it might be.
Oh, it was just it was going to be earlier, but it's
But then it
actually
turns
not.
out, no, that's
It's
the
actually
pre-show.
fall, so
Yeah.
I'm going to stay up till 5 in the fucking morning again.
Yeah, which was a shame because one would imagine that with
Too
your,
old for this. I thought I was going to stay up till 2 and go to bed. It would be great.
that's it. With your international audience, you would have figured that it would have worked relatively well in that
Because I
sense.
can't drink anyway, so they might as well just sit sober in the afternoon. What's
Yeah.
the difference to them? Like?
Go home and drink.
Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, I'm drinking and I'm up till fucking 2
Unless
a.m.
unless you're Spike Lee at the after party. I'm going to take
indeed,
another glass of
indeed,
champagne. I do love Spike
Good
Lee.
on Spike.
In other news, again, Cannes is approaching, rapidly so. But a bit of news related to Irish films. Lorcan Finnegan's Vivarium has been selected for Critics' Week.
Yes, this is I think Tom Clark tweeted about it, that the first Irish film to be selected for Cannes since Peter, what's-his-face's film, documentary, Rocky Road to Dublin.
Yeah, which was years
The
ago, right?
closing
When
film,
was that?
apparently in the 60s.
So that's quite a sort of... That is
Yeah.
quite a sort of like a pedigree to have.
Yeah,
to sort of...
we don't get many films to Cannes because the French people don't tend to look our way, even though we actually make.
We're
good
doing
films.
very, very well. Yeah.
But for some reason, we're not as artsy as Nicholas Winding Refn.
Gee, do you not like Nicholas Winding Refn or
That
something?
cold chill filled the room.
I just turned off the air conditioning.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, you did.
It's
So
a
yeah,
long and winding road to Dublin.
indeed.
So to
We
speak.
don't tend to get a look in a can, and it's really weird. I don't think we make films to kind of try hit there. We tend to
that they aim
in
for that
Toronto or
demographic.
Sundance or whatever. We tend to aim for more.
Because I was talking about this with somebody else recently when it was when I was watching the
You've
trailer.
other people to talk to.
I know. I was watching the trailer for The Dig came on, and I think
Yes.
Grace actually pointed out that it looked really melancholy and depressing and bleak. And it was like, I kind of made the
See, this is usually the point where I would say the vast majority of films that I associate with here or that come from here are melancholy and bleak, but Niall will probably have a meltdown. So
and Niall would probably be right.
So.
But I was actually thinking that
a lot of them are.
there are relative. Okay, I was going to say there are relatively mainstream breakthroughs that are that kind of like what you would imagine sort of European art house cinema bleak from here. I mean, even Rosie like has a little bit of warmth at its core that I can't imagine.
The last one I remember the Irish film that could do out of can be something like Mammal.
Mammal, yes, which is the most French
any
Irish
of
film ever. Rebecca Daly's
films I could see flying there.
Mammal is the most French Irish film I've ever seen.
Yes, and I think that's a good thing. I know you're less so.
I'm somewhat cool
but yeah, and it's weird. Like I'm glad it's in there, and I've been curious to see it. I think it's Jesse Eisenberg, isn't it?
It is indeed. It's Jesse Eisenberg and Imogen Poots, or Imogen Poots. Imogen Poots.
Jesus,
I just like saying Poots a lot. But yeah, so yeah, it's the two of them. It's been compared to The Twilight Zone by people who've seen it, which is a very vague and ambiguous reference, given that The Twilight Zone is an anthology show of wildly variable tone and quality.
An anthology film.
Yeah,
which always do well, right?
Yeah, I mean, when could they ever fail? But it's kind of it's impressive. I'm a big fan of Finnegan myself. I have Foxes premiered or was showing at the IFI Horathon a couple of years ago, and I caught it there. It was very good, which is again one of those rare movies about a ghost estate where you're wondering how there haven't been more Irish horror films about a ghost estate.
Yeah.
And Foxes is very, very good. Grace might like it. It's about nature sort of encroaching into spaces that have been nominally claimed by man but subsequently abandoned and neglected. But even Without Name, which is one of those ecological horrors which I've really liked.
Which I have lined up to watch actually. I was going to watch it last weekend because I had to do worky type things. I didn't, but I'm going to watch this weekend, and I will more and on next week. I'm actually, because yourself and I are big fans, so
I really liked it.
I really want to get
it's
to it.
one of my favourite Irish horror films of the past couple of years.
But we've only made one great Irish horror film, haven't we? Isn't that The Hole in the Ground? It's the only great Irish horror film there's ever been.
The Hole in the Ground is a really good Irish horror film.
According to websites in the internet.
And I'm glad to see The Hole in the Ground get like recognition and praise. I think it's very good.
One day somebody will have to look at history of Irish film and actually watch the fucking thing.
Yeah,
so we know
it would have been nice if The Hole in the Ground could have stuck around in cinemas for maybe more than like.
I like The Hole in the Ground. I didn't love it, but I did like it. There's a lot of great stuff in it, even though it doesn't quite work as well as it thinks it does. But there's a lot of really good things in there.
All right, we're at the IFI now for the Trish McAdam season.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to this. I am aware of Trish McAdam. The only film I'm aware of her is that kind of had a bit of a public kind of mention as such as when he came out with Snakes and Ladders from a few years back.
1997.
Yeah, that had a bit of a kind of a cinematic kind of
push or
release. Yeah, a little. Yeah, I'm not aware of any of her films before that. I want to get to this again. Myself and Rowan have complained enough about Irish films that we don't get to see, particularly
not getting seasons,
particularly from the 80s, particularly women directors who there are few and far between, particularly back in the day, and even still now to some degree. But
much
documentary we've a hell of a lot, but in fiction film terms we don't get a huge amount. But particularly back in the day, after watching the various other ones like Maeve and stuff like that in the last few weeks, I'm going to get along to a few of these. This looks really good. It's
running from May the 7th through to May the 25th, and highlights include it's opening with screenings of her latest works, which are Confinements and Strangers to Kindness. Confinement explores changes in social control, mental asylums, and rehabilitation from Henrietta Street to Grange Gorman, narrated by the imagined words of late artist Tony Rudenko, voiced by Aidan Gillen. The film will include music by Roger Doyle. Strangers of Kindness is a playful reimagining of an 80s trip McAdam took through the US, featuring actress Megan Healy and music by Vivian Long. This timely film focuses on a young woman who accepts a lift from a stranger to a party that does not exist. And the event will include a conversation between McAdam and filmmaker Dean Kavanagh as well.
Never take a lift from strangers that don't exist.
Other than that,
or parties that don't exist.
There's screenings of What Am I Doing Here as well, which will be her intimate 2008 hour-long documentary. There is Hoodwinked, which is screening on Saturday the 11th, in which sees McAdam reclaim Irish women from generations of obscurity through a prism of notable events, including the War of Independence, the Mother and Child Scheme, Northern Ireland, and the Battle for Civil Rights.
I'm very much looking forward to that.
So, I mean, there's a whole host of really great stuff there. The final double bill on Tuesday the 31st features Flirting with the Light, which is her 2002 documentary following musician Leo Kelly, recording his first solo album 25 years, which is Glare. And then obviously Snakes and Ladders, which, as you point out, you've already seen. Was that
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it. I'm aware of it. It's the only one of hers I'm aware of, but I will try.
That's closing on Sunday the 25th and
Yeah.
has a 35mm screening. So if you want to book, you can go directly to the IFI.
Yeah, I'm all over it.
All right, let's move on to everybody's favorite part of the show. It's the top 10. You can hear the sounds of tumbleweeds blowing, almost as if something is lurking in the long grass. At number 10, inexplicably still there, it's Hellboy.
Jeez, when it was released,
I wasn't even sure that. Yeah, I did. Well, I knew this had been released, and yet I also didn't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I don't think it's going to survive beyond tomorrow, though.
No, it's second week. 59 locations.
We were talking about going and giving this a bit of a hate watch, and we can't because it's not showing anywhere after yesterday.
You could always watch the originals and give them a hate watch because they're not very good.
The original's fine, and the second one's great.
I've seen the original one, and I don't remember it, so go me.
And
I haven't seen the second one.
I was reflecting actually on how good a year 2008 was for superhero films, because you had...
Was it?
You had The Dark Knight, you had The Golden Army, you also had Punisher Warzone, which I have to catch.
Twilight
Which is the
was
best
out that year too.
one of that year, I would argue.
Punisher Warzone's about third.
Punisher Warzone
And he also had
might be
Iron
my
Man as
favourite
well.
superhero film of all time.
Warzone's great.
It's amazing.
There's a moment where he punches a dude through his face. It's great.
It's essentially violent.
I think that
unbelievably
Roger Ebert has described Punisher Warzone as what if a Steven Seagal movie was good.
Yeah.
That's what
There's
we're talking
a
about here.
bazooka shot of somebody through the air,
amazing.
which is one of the greatest shots in action film I have ever seen.
It's fantastic.
It's
and I wholeheartedly
I wish the
recommend it.
IFI or Lighthouse, if anybody's listening, would show that.
Like
on
a
the big
Hollywood
screen, 'cause I
Babylon.
would
It
watch
Seems like
the
it would be
hell out
great for Hollywood
Oh
Babylon,
my
yeah.
god, it'd be amazing. I bet you've already showed that. I've missed it. I'd be disgusted.
Very much in need of a rehabilitation.
Oh, it's
as
fabulous.
well.
Absolutely, God bless Lexi Alexander.
You know what
Fantastic
isn't in need of a rehabilitation?
Hit me.
Hellboy at number 10. At number 9, 5 Feet Apart.
I haven't seen this. The trailer looks a bit silly, but I'm
Oh, is this the cystic fibrosis
Yes.
one?
Yes.
We came this close to going
You
to
get
see
5
Great.
feet. They were
it. And then
5 feet.
Jughead from Riverdale is in it.
I know.
Why do you think we were
I
going to see
giggled when I saw the
it?
trailer. I know that wasn't the appropriate response, but I actually guffawed in the cinema.
You heartless monster.
I know, right?
And you say Darren has no heart.
What about 6 feet apart?
Hold on, how come
What
people
about
say
5 feet
that?
apart? It's like, what about 4 feet apart? The sequel. It's like, oh, stop, please, you're killing me, lads.
Well, surely the sequel's 6
4 and a
feet
half
apart.
feet apart.
Yeah.
No, you start with 6 feet and then you move to 5
You
feet.
inch close.
But
then you're limiting your market, Jim.
Listen, don't take it up with the filmmakers.
Okay.
You know,
Anyway, if it rocks up on Netflix, then I'll probably watch
yeah,
it.
I probably would as well.
I'm sure it's harmless enough.
Yeah.
At number 8, it's Little, which is probably better than it should be, while still not necessarily being very good. It's the reverse big.
It's a pity it wasn't called Ickle.
That's actually called. Could have changed that title for the Irish mark.
Ickle, lickle, little.
You should have been on there.
Little is just a very uninspiring title.
It is.
Like,
It
I
could
know
be
why they
literally
went
anything.
for it
It's
if
the
they were
exact
going for
opposite
the
of big.
opposite to
Yeah, I
big.
know, yeah.
The exact opposite to big would have been small,
Yeah.
but I guess they couldn't do that because reasons.
Tiny.
Tiny.
No, tiny would be the opposite of huge, surely.
Yeah, I'm too tired.
At number
You're
7,
absolutely
Sorry.
correct, but
at number 7, it's Pet Cemetery.
I
I've seen
don't
it.
want
I
to be buried,
still haven't.
etc.
I will
The
get to it,
Ramones.
but I probably
I don't
won't
think
get
you'd
to
like it, Jay.
I don't think I will.
I
either.
don't imagine you would come out with strong feelings.
It's too
Although
much
if
of
we buried
a...
you in a Pet Cemetery, and then you watch Pet
I'd come back
Cemetery,
cheerier.
that version of Jay would probably like Pet Cemetery.
Yeah.
I'm claustrophobic. I would not like to be buried in a pet cemetery.
I didn't hate this, liked it a little bit,
But not great.
but not as I didn't hate it as much as most people. I didn't love it as much as those people who loved it.
I
That's
think
such is
it's perfectly generically crowd-pleasing.
I don't like generic horror though.
No, neither do
they
I.
pull me
Like,
out.
I didn't like it very much, but I can see why it would appeal
Yeah,
to
okay.
a lot
I
of
get you.
people. It's not terrible by any means. There's
It
definitely a worse tripe out there.
It certainly wasn't a grave misfire.
Oh, God.
At number 6, it's Captain Marvel.
Yay!
Making
I
I have
waves
seen
for
it.
a new
Yeah,
rival.
I've seen something. Woohoo! Yeah. I like Captain Marvel.
Would you go so far as to say it's marvelous?
I love it.
Probably wouldn't go so as marvelous, but
It's a pity that it's not out at Christmas, because otherwise we'd be singing its praises in carols.
stop. I like it's a.
You had
it's
to
a-
work for that one.
It's
now.
a solid
God,
3-star Marvel film.
Yeah.
Which is like it's weird because we had a conversation about Grace when you weren't on, and myself and Darren
When
have
I was dancing in the hall.
have rated it the same
On Letterboxd.
on Letterboxd. Yet it looks like we're in completely different corners of the same film. It's really odd. Like
This
you
is,
know what I mean? Like,
this is the weird thing where people are like, Darren hates fun. It's like, no, I have issues with the film. I
I've
think
never
it's
said you
charming.
hated fun to your face.
You accuse me of not having a heart.
That's two different things. Sorry. That's
okay.
two different things.
All right. But it's like, yeah, I can have problems with a film and still think that it's quite charming.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. It's a shaky start, and it gets a lot better once it hits blockbuster. And
Ayo.
Larson is glorious and carries the film through some shaky moments. and Jackson is having great fun. The effects on the younger face thing is absurd. The soundtrack's great. Goose is great. There's a lot. It's one of those films that I don't think is necessarily great, but I had a lot of fun watching it.
Yeah.
And in a similar way to Ragnarok, in a bizarre sort of way.
This is more fun than Ragnarok, though.
I can see why either would say that, though.
disagree.
Do you know what I mean? I can see why people would prefer Ragnarok, though.
Yeah.
Because it has that kind of otherworldly kind of...
Ragnarok is...
This
like,
is a bit more grounded, and
this
I
is-
can understand why...
This is a bit more formulaic
yeah.
and structured.
But I
I feel like, I probably have to preface everything by saying that as a woman, Captain Marvel means quite a lot.
can see that. I can talk about
I agree entirely, and that's entirely valid.
And I think she's fantastic.
But that's not the only
Larson.
reason.
No.
I really like her in it.
Right.
And it got just... I mean, the fact that it was a little muddled earlier on, and a couple of other issues that I had with it aside, I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
I kind of I mean, that's fine. You know what I mean? That's good enough.
I saw a thread on Twitter earlier in the week by that one whose name I can't remember, Willow something. You were
Willow
talking about
McKay.
her. Yeah, she put up a short thread talking about the difference between, well, not even necessarily the difference. I think she was just saying from her perspective how much being emotionally invested in a film, or emotionally stimulated, I think is the expression she used, as compared to being intellectually stimulated
I
by a
completely
film.
agree with that.
And how she would choose the emotional one always. And I think this is what stands out for me with Captain Marvel and with a lot of other films, where I can see on paper, if you put that script down and you think, yeah, this is a bit clunky, it's a bit messy, like it's kind of told back to front. There's not a huge deal of character development in there. There is an arc. I do feel very strongly there's an arc, but it's
there
a
actually is an arc.
pretty generic arc, but as an experience, an immersive experience, I think it's just incredibly fun.
I
And
quite
very
like those things,
uplifting, and it has a wonderful message.
Yeah.
And I love the choice that they made to play Carol the way she is throughout, because they open with her being somebody who's very strong, very secure in herself, very sure of herself. She doesn't really doubt herself at any stage. There's no part where she's like disemboweled, Jesus. Or
That's a different film.
That's a
different film.
slightly different film.
or questioning herself or putting herself down.
Yeah.
She doesn't go and do like a Luke Skywalker, I'm going to an island to think about my feelings kind of thing. Like, she's just very single-minded, I think, throughout, and she's allowed to be, and I really like that. Like, there's no stage where she's made to earn the confidence that she has. She always acts with complete conviction.
And Larson nails that.
Yeah.
And I really
And
like
that's
their 9
different.
Inch Nails
That's
t-shirt.
very different.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I would say that, like, I think Wonder Woman does the exact same thing, actually, where its character arc pretty much consists of the character saying, hey, I've decided I'm doing this thing, and a bunch of men saying, you're not doing this thing. This
But
thing
Wonder
you're doing
Woman
is stupid.
comes from a much purer place, I think. As a character, she's very sweet and kind of naive when it begins, and she's someone who learns
Yeah,
to
there's a
harness
touch of
that
Thor
as a
of
strength.
like in a different world kind of thing.
Even though everyone around her is telling her it's a weakness.
And also telling her that what she's doing is stupid. Like, there's a moment where, like, Chris Pine's character, Steve, who is, like, really likes her, is like, you realize you can't actually punch War in the face. And she's like, yeah, I can. Watch me. Which is great.
No, I can get the love Captain Marvel, and that's interesting in terms of the kind of emotional, intellectual kind of reason, because I've had various films where I've had both of the same, almost of the same film. Sometimes where you can, and that's when I think it's something special.
Yeah.
Where you
It's
kind
a
of
rare film.
yeah, that can
that
kind
does
of connect
that.
both. And I'd probably kind of lean towards the emotional thing of it, whereas younger me would certainly have leaned towards the intellectual version.
Well, I think what I always come back to is that it's always going to be emotion for me, because as much as I love films as texts, shall we say, I did not start watching films as a child because I was interested in their allegories with some obscure geopolitical context. For me, it was always about how they make me feel. So I think if a film makes me feel really happy and really uplifted and really engaged, it is always going to win out over any objective analysis of how stupid it may or may not be.
I think that anybody would agree with that. I think that's a perfect
Well,
reasonable position.
I do, but except my brain will tell me differently a lot of the time. But even once I can agree with
have
that.
moments when you're like, this is really stupid, but I don't care.
Are you telling me
Like
that
Independence Day.
Are you
incredibly stupid.
You're telling me Temple of Doom
incredibly
isn't a
amazing.
masterpiece? It's also incredibly racist, but you're telling me it's not a masterpiece.
It is
how much have I
masterpiece.
gone to bat for Gotti in the last 6 weeks? Plus, Talladega Nights the best comedy of the century.
It is pretty great.
So there you go. That's all I say about that.
All right. At number 5, it's Wonder Park.
What is Wonder Park?
The director.
The director-less.
The director of
Because
because he has sexual harassment things, so he took him off the film.
Yeah.
So it's a director's film.
And it's to sell a TV product as well, so they couldn't, like, shelve
Ditch
it.
it, yeah.
They couldn't ditch it. They had to get it out there to launch the line. So it's like... And again, this is one of the things where, like, I know they're a major corporation, they're a company, they should have done their due diligence beforehand.
They really bloody should have.
There's a point where you're like, Paramount.
It's always Paramount.
Why is it always Paramount?
Yeah.
The worst studio ever, Paramount.
It's like,
Here's another 100 million. Waste that.
yeah, it's like, okay, this
Can I
was...
ask someone a question, though, just because I just thought of Paramount, which made me think of Mission Impossible. You know at the start... Sorry, this complete
No,
segue.
go for it.
You know at the start of Mission Impossible Fallout, when they're in that tunnel somewhere in Berlin and they're
Yes.
trying to sell the plutonium to this random German terrorist? Does that German terrorist look like Pascal Donahue to anyone? Because he really looks like Pascal Donahue to me.
I can't remember. I'd have to
And
look
this
at it.
annoys me.
Ireland is now a nuclear power.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it past Finnegan.
Reflect on that.
That's all I got.
While we're doing
That
that,
has nothing to do at Wonder Park.
at number 4, it's Greta. Which, you know, I mean, it's
How to do, actually.
50,000 euro in total, which is obviously not perfect, but it's still, you know, again, it
It's
was a
niche
slow
enough
week.
to some degree as well.
It is indeed. And I mean,
Uh,
people have been noticing it. I suspect it'll do quite well in home media.
Yeah, I really liked it. I can imagine it playing really well in the kind of RT late night.
That's it.
Kind
I've
of
had a lot of-
midweek kind of film kind of thing.
Like-
it's great fun.
My parents don't go to the cinema very often, and they're not going to the cinema to see this, but they're like, that looks interesting. So, I mean, I suspect it'll do very well
That'd be
in
a
home media.
Mooney family movie night.
Oh, it absolutely will.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But it's great
Those are
fun.
always
Like
great fun.
I
It's-
really liked it.
yeah.
If you are stuck for a film, Grace,
Yeah. It's a
I'm not
Greta
going to be stuck
choice.
for film for a few weeks.
that's true.
At number 3, it's Wild Rose. All right, then. Yeah, which is...
That cough wasn't
Yeah.
to do with the quality of the film because I haven't seen
Yeah.
it.
Which again, I'm on the fence about it. There's a lot to love in there. There's also a lot in there that's incredibly formulaic. There's a
Sorry,
sense of
Alex, for forcing you to chicken.
trying to balance this idea of being a Star is Born tale with also being a kitchen sink British drama, not quite landing the two of them perfectly, like not synthesizing them well enough. I mean, Jessie Buckley's amazing because she's
a new
Jessie
Irish
Buckley.
star, like, right?
What?
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. No,
Let's
it's
go back
amazing.
and watch her in War and Peace.
I haven't seen War and Peace.
This is a great adaptation of War and Peace that also has Lily James, James Norton, and
does it
Jack
also have?
Lowden.
Is this wait?
Holy shit.
Paul Dano?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, you buried the lead there.
Yeah, sorry. Don't let him put you
no,
off.
No,
Don't let
too
him
late
put you
now,
off.
Grace.
It's
God
great.
damn it.
Did I
It's
accidentally ruin
genuinely
it?
a
You
very
did, yeah,
fun
yeah.
I'm
adaptation.
sorry. What?
Oh,
You don't
and-
like Paul Dano?
Who likes Paul Dano?
I like Paul Dano.
I'm not a big fan of Paul Dano.
Thank you.
When I
Grace.
watched it first, the reason I watched it was Paul Dano.
Jesus.
Oh, look who has a crush.
I know.
Good lord, you really have no heart.
Lily James was right there in the thumbnail.
Yeah, I mean,
and so was
fuck
Gillian
Lily
Anderson.
James.
I mean, okay, well, yeah, Gillian. Yeah,
Gilly James.
Gillian Anderson.
I'm sure there's somebody else who's famous in it, but I can't remember.
I should watch
Anyone.
this, shouldn't I?
I think
No, it's good. It's really
this
good.
dates
Alright.
back from probably what 2015, 2014, right?
2016, I think.
2016. Yeah, I may have made a deal with somebody.
I'm
I
pretty
think
sure it's on Netflix still as well.
she got Paul
Oh.
Dano and I got Gillian Anderson. It was a good deal. Anyway, sorry.
What a
so
deal. What
at
a
number
deal.
2, it's Shazam, baby.
I'll probably watch this at home
Yeah.
6 months from now.
I actually wouldn't have minded going to see this, but it's going to disappear from the cinema before I go, so I'll
How long
just
ago?
watch it at home.
How long pre?
The other Captain
And-
Marvel movie.
Like, because this is a crowded field, like in terms of Captain Marvel and
Oh, it's a credit film
Endgame.
in terms of
Like, no, just in the last few weeks. Like, when did Shazam get released in that regard?
Shazam's been out for 3 weeks.
It seems an odd time. Well, it's a bit. When it's a good
it's
time.
a
Like,
quiet,
it's
low key. Like I mean, the issue again, it doesn't have the branding of a Marvel film.
it's relatively
and
less
it's from
in budget, I presume.
yeah, it's relatively tightly budgeted as well. It's also a DC movie, which means it could be all over the place in terms of quality.
Also, it has a loyal fan base to a certain degree as well. No,
Did they turn out for Shazam, though?
Well, more than they did for Justice League, anyway, which is what's
Really?
important. Yeah, well, Justice League
intrigued by that.
bombed spectacularly, which is good because
well,
it's
I'm
terrible.
shocked. The
It is-
minute and a half I've seen it and laughed uproariously at
Justice
was
League.
like, my God, who
Well,
made this?
I haven't seen it, but I would have thought that the people who are so obsessively devoted to DC would have gone to see it. Or did they have some... Was there some boycott campaign
Release
going
the
on
Snyder
over there?
Cut. The Snyder Cut, Grace.
Right.
but
What's
yeah.
his face came onto it, didn't he?
Wheaton.
Did he come into it?
Oh,
Is that-
Whedon
He
came
did,
on the
yeah.
Yeah,
last
that's
minute.
why. That's why.
So they drafted on Joss Whedon in case you didn't get that they were trying to Avengerize
Release
it.
the Snyder Cut.
Thank you, Jay. The
I don't
internet's
care about
Banging
anything.
his pint glass at the
Stop
table.
being people, DC. Jesus. So
But yeah.
weird.
But yeah, so I suspect that it was released sort of low key to earn a bit of money around that. I don't
Oh, it
think
did
anybody's
okay, though.
expecting it did okay. It's okay. It is okay of itself.
Yeah, yeah.
It's pretty solidly made. It's got a really good first 2 acts. Sandberg is a pretty good director. I like Lights Out. I know that other people don't.
I didn't
necessarily.
mind it. It's okay.
Oh, I think Lights Out is on Netflix now.
Yeah,
It's not
I
bad.
wholeheartedly recommend it. It has a terrible an absolutely terrible last element and choice that's made, which is the wrong choice. And there's a sense
On a scale of 1 to the ending of The Gift, how terrible are we talking?
we're talking like about 2/3 of the way there.
Grim.
Yeesh.
Yeah.
Now I'm
and
intrigued.
to be
I
fair
kind
to
of forgot.
Sandberg, he's owned it in interviews. He's explained that his original ending was overruled by the studio, or it was kind of lost in the test screen with audiences. And he's also said that if he gets to do a sequel, which he wants to do, one of the things that he will do is he will deal with the ending. But the ending is a pretty...
I'm trying to remember now. So
very obvious misstep. Well, it's an extension of the film's central metaphor.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Film's central metaphor is the monster is depression and
Yeah,
stalking
yeah.
a family. Do you remember how it ends?
No.
Okay, we'll talk about it off air. At number 1, it's Dumbo! I don't know why I did that.
Oh, yeah, he's so fucking enthusiastic.
He's
there.
very excited about Dumbo.
You and your elephants.
It's Colin Farrell and Big D, baby. Yeah.
Stop saying.
That was completely unnecessary
Stop
in
saying
every
that.
way.
He keeps calling
You said
him-
it last week, and that's enough. That once was enough for that joke.
All right.
Slash line.
It's not a
slash
joke, it's a
slash living nightmare.
It's getting late. Jay's getting crabby.
Or Eva Green. Or woman.
Well, Eva Green continues the trend of being the best thing in most of the movies that she's in.
One
Which
day
is-
she'll get a real role.
I mean,
God help you,
the
all,
dream
when she
for
does.
Eva
She's
Green
amazing.
is like, just aim to be the second best thing in the movie. Like, stop being greedy. Stop being like, there's no way anything
She
in
needs
this
a
film.
better agent slash
Yeah,
better
can we
directors.
not
Give her
dream of a
good
future
work.
where Eva Green gets a film that deserves her?
She should have Oscars, for Christ's sake.
She's amazing. Yeah, I, again, didn't hate Dumbo. It's clumsy, it's awkward, it's very cliche. The kids are not as adorable or precocious as the film thinks that they are. The formula is
When are
fairly
movie kids
conventional.
ever as adorable or
That's it,
precocious
exactly.
as
But
some
I'm
things
probably
are?
not going to see this. I'm continuing my kind of abandonment of Tim Burton films.
All right, then.
And it's kind of sad though, isn't it? Because I love a lot of Tim Burton
know.
movies from back in the day, and then it just
He was
kind of-
great until he wasn't.
He kind of gets a pass from me based on those. Like, this is the thing.
Yeah,
where
I mean,
I
I-
think he has good films in him. I'm
Like-
sure he will make another one. At
I
some
love
stage.
Mars Attacks. I love Ed Wood.
Yeah.
I love
Batman.
Batman and
Batman
Batman
and
Returns.
Beetlejuice.
Batman Returns is the best Christmas
And
movie
Beetlejuice.
ever.
Fantastic.
Beetlejuice,
Yeah.
yes.
like they're all great.
I actually love Sleepy Hollow too.
I have a huge soft spot for Speedy Hollow and Sleepy Hollow, and I quite
That's
like
when it
Sweeney
started to
Todd.
slip the way.
Well, I mean, Sweeney
Sweeney
Todd.
Todd's
yeah.
okay.
Nah.
All right then. So let's move on to talking about the new releases. So I can't think of
Yay.
anything particularly big that's being released
It's
this
been a
week.
very
There's-
boring week.
There's absolutely nothing particularly notable coming out. I mean, there's
Nothing.
Bel Canto, which is directed by Paul Weitz,
That's the
starring
name of a restaurant. Sorry, continue.
Belchibo.
Getting mixed up.
Ah.
Continue.
starring Julianne Moore, Ken Watanabe, Sebastian Koch. It's the story of a world
Sebastian who?
Koch.
I imagine that's
With a K.
K-O-C-H.
Good call. Yes.
Probably Koch.
Sorry, I didn't.
Koch, yeah.
Or,
Come on,
But
okay.
saying it the other way is
Fuck's
more fun.
sake, Darren.
It's like, isn't it like the Koch brothers?
Stop, Darren.
Okay.
I thought it was
Stop saying Koch,
pronounced Koch, but
Sorry,
I don't
I'm
trust
acting-
American pronunciation.
I'm acting
of
a bit of a
anything,
cock
so.
here. Anyway, a world-renowned opera singer becomes trapped in a hostage situation when she's invited to perform for a wealthy industrialist in South America. 100 minutes long, Jay.
Yeah. What's next?
87 minutes on, Robert Ryan's Breaking Habits, which is the story of a commune of activist nuns who run an illegal
Hang on,
cannabis
what?
farm in the town of Merced, CA. They use it to make medicine for everything from epilepsy to cancer to fighting against... and they're
Start that first line. There's
To
something
fighting
about
crime?
nuns.
a commune of activist nuns run an illegal cannabis farm.
Oh, why isn't that
This sounds like high culture at its
I'm all
finest.
over this.
Yeah, I hope the authorities don't smoke them.
Nuns with guns, I hope. Because otherwise it's a waste of my fucking time.
All right
Nuns
then.
with spliffs. Doesn't
Um,
rhyme, it's not so much fun.
Worth noting, Donbass is out this week as well. Which
Is it word note? What is it?
is this? I seem to remember. Has Ronan mentioned this? Perhaps.
Oh shit! Yeah, sorry. Rob.
Sergei Loznitsa. Does that sound familiar? Darren's pronunciation being what it is.
I don't remember what happened.
Okay.
Ronan hasn't been on like 3 weeks. I can't remember back that far.
We miss you, Ronan.
Come on back, Ronan. Bring treats.
In eastern Ukraine, society begins to degrade as the effects of propaganda and manipulation begin to surface in the post-truth era.
That does
That's
sound like a Ronan film. Like.
And it also sounds like the news from this week, to
yeah,
be
yeah,
fair.
it does, yeah.
One you've seen, Jay.
Yes.
8th grade.
Yeah, I saw this at Diff.
Yeah.
I quite like this. It's getting really strong reviews, which is fine. Like it.
I like that
it's
Jay's
totally
not
not
begrudging
fine.
it. Yeah, Jay's...
This directed by Bob Burnham.
Yes.
And starring the brilliant Elsie Fisher as a kind of 13-year-old called Kayla who has this kind of horrible kind of adolescent kind of run.
Yeah.
At that age where these things can do, and
Didn't
like,
we all have a horrible adolescent?
But it's this kind of last
Do you
week
think
of
there's
middle
anyone
school.
out there who genuinely enjoyed being a teenager?
Not at all. But this is the kind of teenagery.
Seriously?
I didn't mind it.
I
feel like this explains a lot.
Yeah, it does. No wonder you're heartless.
Okay.
Anyway,
You weren't broken by society and shit.
I was. But
Great. I didn't have any responsibilities or obligations.
Jesus,
God.
I just had to learn
it's
stuff.
disgusting, isn't it?
It is.
Got to read what I wanted. Mostly got to watch what I wanted when I hit a certain
Probably
age.
still knocking out 7,000 word articles on. fucking
I
something
would have
over
really
here.
enjoyed my teenage years if there were not other teenagers around.
Hey, story. I enjoyed my adult years, but there wasn't other adults around.
precisely.
Yeah.
Once they figured out that they needed me to do their homework, it was pretty okay.
You won those guys.
Yeah. It works relatively well once you figure out you've got the leverage.
True. Anyway, back to 8th.
Sorry, back to 8th grade. Apologies.
Yes. Anyway, this is Kayla, who has this kind of week. I think it's the last week of middle school. Whatever middle schools in America. It's
Yeah,
probably
I don't really understand the
a
other
point.
Is that like
Junior high?
separate from
It's a
primary?
primary school, probably the end of primary
Like
school or
maybe
somewhere
the
around
2
a year
years
after.
we'd have
Like
in
yeah.
primary school here or something. Anyway.
Yeah. But anyway, it's
I'll look this
it's
up.
obviously it's an 8th grade thing, right? And it's interesting because this is
Thank you,
We
Jay.
all understand.
Yeah, thank you,
this
Jay.
is quite contemporary in the sense that she records these
Social
little
media.
YouTube videos, which kind of talking about her life, kind of little.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, you guys.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, you've seen this, right?
No, it's not
I
the
just seen the
trailer.
trailer. And there is kind of real, kind of wonderful. They're quite brilliant videos in the sense that they add so much to the kind of underlying story, which I really like. Like there's a kind of sadness to them, in the sense that she's very aware that practically nobody is watching them, and she's not quite sure why she's even doing them,
Aw.
which I kind of like in terms of the film. And Burnham is an interesting director. Like he has like these couple of 2 or 3 sequences that are kind of odd and a little strange, which add a little kind of not danger to the film, but certainly an element of
Edge, perhaps?
yeah, edge and awareness of like things just outside your understanding in the world, which I quite like. But like it's fine. I liked it. It's a solidly made film, but it's quite familiar. I mean, you'll have seen this before.
Well, I mean, mid-90s,
Yeah,
Lady Bird.
Like, but this is a solid version of these things. It's not quite that though, because I mean, this is a bit younger than those kind of ones. Like the script is funny and it's quite sweet, and Fisher is great. So they added quite a lot to it. I think it's been a touch overpraised to some degree, because people like the turn and they like the kind of the sweetness of it, and that's fine. But I think it's probably been a touch kind of over as a film. I think
You'd
it's
grade
one
it
of-
more harshly?
Slightly. It's like it's fine. It's one of those things I really liked when I saw, and then a couple of hours later, and the more I thought about it, it kind of
You have a love-hate relationship with it?
stop there. Stop, Jesus. But it kind of slipped away a little bit, you know, in the concept. Didn't quite last. Didn't quite
burn
figure.
itself on your memory?
God, what I wouldn't give for a sock with horse mirror in it. It's a Woody Allen line. Sorry, I did use it. You don't use Woody Allen lines anymore. Anyway, it was in anyhow.
And Tumbleweed just put in the
Yes.
studio.
It's a good line though. But,
Also,
but it's not bad. I'd recommend people seeing it. The performance by Elsie Fisher is well worth seeing on its own. But there's a lot of good stuff in there.
also out this week, The World Is Yours. Obviously the line from Scarface. Director Roman Gavras, which is the story of a small-time dealer dreams of another life but can't afford it.
My God,
To
we haven't seen
escape,
that before.
he must... Wait for it, Jay.
Oh God.
To escape, he must accept one last job.
Oh what?
Involving Spain,
What?
drugs,
No.
the Illuminati,
What?
and his overbearing mother.
No.
You had me at Illuminati.
I mean, the Illuminati was a bit of a swerve for me, to be honest.
I know nothing about this.
Who
and
run
I'm
Baghdad?
happy to not know any more about it, to be honest.
Sorry, that is the sound of Jay getting over his own, like,
No,
issues.
damn
definitely
you, Luke.
in a couple of months there'll just be like this moment where Jay breezes in and he'll be like, you know what I watched this week? I watched this film.
The Illuminati one.
The Illuminati film.
It's great, but
You
kind of
guys-
terrible.
you
It
guys-
sounds vaguely like one of your Colombian noirs. It's like he takes a job for assassination, but it's suddenly abducted to the
How many minutes is in it?
Yeah.
It's only
100
89 minutes long. It's black and white. It's on the Criterion channel.
Yeah.
You guys will watch them all, and you will love them.
If not Movie Austria.
And the
Yes.
and
Sounds perfect.
the big Irish release this week is The Dig. Which
I'm reading
haven't
for
seen.
this. I haven't seen this. Niall saw it in
at the Galway Film Festival, I believe.
Yeah, and did a bit of a Q&A, I think, at the
He
the
did
screen at
yesterday
Dungarvan,
in Dungarvan with Mo Dunford's hometown.
and the lads.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I've heard good things. I missed it at the Fla, unfortunately, because I was probably eating pizza.
You were flat.
But I heard good things, really good things, and I'm really looking forward to catching it.
You think you dig it?
I think I might dig it.
All right.
I think I
Let's
may
hope
well
you don't get
dig it.
bogged down
I
over
dug
the next
the
couple of
dig.
weeks.
No diggity.
Hey, I see what you did there.
God, look what you've made me come, Darren. Good Lord.
I think that
I'm
there's
ashamed
time.
of myself.
It's time for Mo here, ladies and
Oh,
gentlemen.
Jesus.
But yeah, I'm quite looking forward to this. I'm very
I need
looking
a
forward to
hole
get
in
to see
the
this as well. And I think that about is that the only that's the end. Have we reached the end of films being released this week?
Definitely.
But yeah, so Endgame.
It's
Is
a
that-
thing.
Listen, remind me what this
It's
is.
a
A small
low-budget
indie movie.
Yes. Directed by the Rousseau brothers, you may know for their work in television. It's primarily the story of. Have you seen the TV show The Leftovers?
Yes, I have.
It's quite like that. Except it's also, have you seen that TV show Star Trek?
Yes.
It's also a bit like that.
Oh, you're doing a thing, aren't you?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, anyway, sorry. Go
Do
ahead.
you want to
then.
go first or should I?
You go first.
I don't know. I feel like I'll end it on a high note and you won't, so I think you should go first.
If one were inclined to be cynical about such
But
things...
you wouldn't be, Darren, surely.
If one were inclined to be cynical about such things, there's probably something very telling that the biggest movie of the year, and possibly the biggest event in recent cinematic history, is arguably its closest descendant is the television clip show. It's an interesting film in a number of ways.
That's vaguely spoilery. We probably should have said that.
I mean, like, it could be anything. I'm not even mentioning how it incorporates
Oh,
said
people will figure
things.
that out, I feel like.
All right.
Sorry. Continue. Ignore
But yeah,
me.
okay. If we're talking in the broadest possible terms, I was not a huge fan of this, and I was not a huge fan of it for a number of reasons. A lot of it is just down to the fact that a lot of it feels very cynical, very calculated. Very incredibly manipulative and sort of maneuvered. There's a weird thing where it doesn't work in terms of tone. Now, I mean, obviously we're not going to talk about spoilers, but we're assuming that you may have seen or are familiar with the ending of Infinity War, which has been described, and again, it's an interesting description, and I think there's some merit in it despite my cynicism about the film itself. The description of Infinity War as our generation's equivalent of The Empire Strikes Back, or a younger generation's Empire Strikes Back
I
moment.
can understand why that's being used.
And I think it's a valid comparison. It ends
It's
on a
funny
low
because
point.
I remember when somebody compared Age of Ultron to The Empire Strikes Back. Also, I'm just realizing now I completely forgot to mention Age of Ultron when I was talking about what films I'd seen because my brain doesn't work. Sorry, continue. And I remember 2 other films that I watched this week that I didn't mention either.
Do a coda.
So
We'll circle
again-
back
Yeah,
around.
you had your chance, you blew
I
it.
gave
My
you a
brain
chance.
doesn't work. It was rendered mush by Endgame, clearly.
I gave you a chance to be a film podcaster, and you blew it.
I'm a disaster.
Copland is great. I love Copland.
Copland is great.
Yeah.
I have seen that one.
But the issue with Endgame for me, several issues. Biggest one is in terms of tone. It's a film that's coming off the back of what is a monumentally horrific event. That's dark, horrific, has all sorts of implications. And the interesting thing about it is that Endgame gets relatively close to selling that. The opening sequence of Endgame, which is remarkable given that I absolutely loathe the character involved in the sequence. But the sequence that opens Endgame is probably the best sequence of the 2 films taken together as a whole. Because it's the one film that actually sells the emotional horror of what's happening on a scale which is tangible and sort of gripping and effective, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the problem with this is that the film never settles on a tone. It alternates dramatically, particularly in the first 40 minutes, between a tone that's very dour and very equivalent to, we compared Infinity War to a PG-13 version of Game of Thrones. This idea of a hugely vast tapestry in which you have characters who are taking over a huge geographical distance, brought together for the purposes of fighting what is, Grace has pointed out, possibly readable as a metaphor for the horrors of climate change. And again, that's a structure that was borrowed from Jonathan Hickman's Avengers run and stuff like that. It's a clever thing to do, and it works relatively well structurally. I'm structurally in awe of Infinity War, lest I be accused of being cynical or sort of overly...
Too later.
Okay. But the issue with Endgame then is Endgame does a number of things. It takes a lot from The Leftovers. It kind of becomes this weird PG-13 version of The Leftovers. That's kind of interesting in that. There's a moment where one character who has been stuck in... has completely missed what's happened, is wandering through town, and it's really depressing, it's dark, there's signs up, posters, there's rubbish that hasn't been collected. A kid comes cycling by, and this character who's been out of the loop asks, hey, kid, what happened? The kid stops his bike, turns around, stares at him. Dead eyes. good 20 seconds of silence pass, which is remarkable in a blockbuster that's this packed, that they allow that to pass. Kid turns around and cycles on. And it's moments like that that really sell this idea of what has actually happened emotionally to the characters. And those work really well. The only problem is they are juxtaposed with other moments where kids who have apparently also lived through the same horrific traumatic event are queuing up at the Waffle House to take pictures with their favourite Avenger in scenes that go on for far too long and are far too jokey, and there's never a sense that any of these characters have actually dealt with or processed kind of what's happened to them. And there's this thing, that push and pull that happens throughout that never really works. There's also, and this is really strange to me, because... And again, this makes me sound like footy old man Mooney shaking his fist at the sky. But what is it about these characters that makes them heroes? And again, I don't want to be too spoilery, because, I don't want to be overly spoilery or anything like that, but the ending of the film in particular involves decisions with two major characters, which consists of them going, well, I'm in a position of responsibility and authority. I've been put in charge of people who are dealing with this, something that horrific that has happened to them. I have an obligation to them to take care of them, because that's what a hero does. To quote Ragnarok, Ragnarok has that really great moment where Thor says, I'm going to do this because that's what heroes do. At the end of Endgame, two of the primary cast are confronted with these moments of realization and responsibility, and this idea that people owe them, and like that they're sort of inspired this loyalty, and that they have this role to play. And in both cases, Endgame has characters say, feck it, I'm out of here. And it just seems really cynical and bleak. And the movie expects you to applaud the characters for doing these things. There's a line that's directed at one of the characters, and again, it's not a spoiler because it's out of context, but I'm going to be who I am, not who I'm supposed to be. Which just, to me, encapsulates a lot of my issues with the Marvel formula. We talked about this on the podcast before, where you have movies like, say, Age of Ultron, which I really like, but Age of Ultron's formula is Tony is told not to create an artificial intelligence. Tony creates an artificial intelligence. It almost destroys the world. Tony creates another artificial intelligence. This time it works fine. Tony was right. You also have things like Spider-Man Homecoming, where Peter Parker is told not to intervene in affairs above his pay grade. Peter Parker interferes in events above his pay grade. Things go horribly wrong. He's told never to do it again. He does it again, and it works perfectly. And there's this weird sense of like Marvel movies effectively being these weird power fantasies where the characters who are nominally heroes don't actually act in any way like heroes. They are primarily interested in validating themselves and serving their own interests. And it, like, watching Endgame, I found myself thinking repeatedly, and this is interesting because you talk about an emotional response to something, but like intellectually and emotionally, I found myself thinking, right, this horrible thing that has happened to the world, right? This horrible thing that Thanos has done and that these characters are nominally dealing with as fallout, right? Would these characters give a flying fuck if they didn't know anybody directly impacted by it?
That is way too harsh. Okay, you can say everything else, but that is way too harsh.
Okay, that was my big issue, my big takeaway with it. But anyway, I'll let Grace go. Sorry.
Needless to say, I disagree pretty fundamentally with everything Darren says, but I like Marvel movies, so I may have a different reaction to this.
I love Marvel movies.
Endgame to me is everything.
Coughing all over everyone. Sorry.
This is, to me, pretty much everything I wanted it to be and everything I didn't know that I wanted it to be. It's very hard for me to go into detail about the stuff that I love without being really spoilery. So, one thing I will say off bat is the note that Darren just made about the opening scene, I was going to bring up because I too think that's incredibly powerful and really an exemplary piece of writing in a film that has incredible writing and incredible character work throughout. And the fact that they use this, it almost feels like, you know, it's something that's, without again going into too spoilery territory, it's removed from everything that's going on, but it's a moment and a character in a situation that sells the nightmarish reality of what has just happened in a way that is at once directly relevant to our heroes and also a way that's, I think, recognizable and understandable to pretty much anyone with a heart. Like, in terms of the human scale of the tragedy. I wasn't directing that at him.
I actually acknowledge the opening scene is the best scene in the two movies.
No, what I mean is that it's on a human level. You can recognize what that would do to someone, is my point, seeing something like that. And I think, and they choose to open the film with this before they go into literally anything else, before they have the Marvel credits thing.
It's similar to the death of Peter Quill's mother in Guardians, and it serves the same purpose.
But it's pretty heavy. Yeah. But then the thing that I really liked about this film was that structurally it goes from, to follow Infinity War, which is, as I've said earlier, something that is relentless. It's an onslaught. Basically, once the film starts, it doesn't really pause for breath at any stage, and there's this incredibly endless build up to something that's like inevitable, I suppose, something that's enormous that you can see coming a mile off, and despite all of their frenetic, increasingly desperate attempts to thwart it, our heroes can't do anything, and it happens. So to open Endgame in a way that's really quiet, and then to go into the first half or so of the film and have it be one that's actually very still and restrained and intimate and much more preoccupied with human interaction and moments between characters and self-reflection, I think, in a way which I haven't seen in some other Marvel movies, because basically they have sort of a prolonged, and again, you shouldn't listen to this is kind of spoilery if you haven't seen it, so but they have sort of prolonged moments where you can see what the impact of this has been on individual characters, and I think the way that they respond to it says a lot about them individually, and I really like that the film took the time and gave them the breathing space to do that before it actually started doing anything meaningful about what happened in the previous film. And then as the film continued, I think the thing that really stood out to me in terms of themes, I suppose, was I just kept hearing Dom Toretto's voice in my head saying the word family. Like, you don't turn your back on family, even if they turn their back on you. Because the themes that really emerged from this film for me were a lot of preoccupations around loss and belonging and what it means to belong and who you have to be in order to belong to someone. And I think it does that in a very, very deft way. And I mean, by the time you get to the end, and I don't think it's spoilery at all to say that there were a lot of tears. I mean, I've never been in a cinema before and had so many people sniffing in unison at the same thing. It was actually unreal. And I mean, I also have to say, this is, like, I complain about cinema audiences all the time because they really annoy me, but a film like this, when you watch it with an audience that is as invested as that audience was last night, was amazing. There were whoops, there were hollers, there were screams, there were sighs, there were gasps. It was just, it's a real advertisement for what it means to have been, or to have a film of this scale succeed in the way that it does. And I think that's the thing that I keep coming back to with this, is that as a culmination of a 10-year, basically unprecedented journey in terms of what it has done for cinema and what its legacy will be, because as much as you may have people emulate this model in the future, it's never going to be done again in the same way because it won't be novel.
It'll be the first, yeah.
And I think for this,
I don't think it'll be done again.
Well, you just couldn't really do it again. But in terms of it being a culmination of a 10-year journey, it really struck me how much the interaction and the interplay between the film and the audience becomes so important, and in a way that's so rewarding to watch as a fan, because when you've been there for all of this and you've watched all of these films, and probably, not even saying that you've done that as a slavish fan, if you could have been just like me and watched them and enjoyed them and then just got increasingly invested as you went along.
I would have been a kind of middling
consumer,
but
and then
got increasingly more interested.
Yeah, basically after, like, the original Avengers movie just became, like, really swept up in it and then got a little bit obsessed. But I think it's such a privilege for the film to have earned that, and to have earned the right to rely on audience investment in a way that works it into the narrative, where, like, if you hadn't seen any of the other films, there are things in here that will make absolutely no sense to you. But if you're watching them as a long-term fan, it's just, like, you can't put into words some of the feelings that you'll have responding to this. And I think the film makes a particular choice in terms of a plan, I suppose, that our heroes have that involves looking back at the MCU in a way that really allows you to relive those moments and relive them with the knowledge that you have gleaned along the way, which makes the experience much richer. And I think just what really stood out for me was the fact that you can, like, it's, how often are you going to be able to do that? like, ever. How is that ever going to happen again?
No, it's fascinating as an artifact of pop culture. And again, Feige has singled out like the ending of The Next Generation, All Good Things, and the again, this idea of modern pop culture, and I think there is something indicative in there. This idea of sort of like going back and reconstructing sort of stuff, and trying to reconstruct the past and nostalgia in an interesting way. In particular, yeah. And I think there's a lot of stuff you can argue about superhero cinema in general. I think we talked in the podcast before about this argument that superhero cinema is largely about reconstructing a weird heroic version of 9/11. And there's a lot of that here, without getting too specific and too spoilery, but where things that are, again, it's structured as a mirror of Infinity War, but things where you have this replay of something from American culture and that imprinted upon the psyche and playing it back in a way that's weird and uncomfortable. I'm not entirely sure that everybody involved in it knew what they were doing, but it's definitely there, which is fascinating.
I think something you said earlier, Darren, and I haven't seen the film, but I'll just throw it at you just as a matter of interest. When you're talking about heroic choices and various things around that, is that, I don't phrase this correctly, is this the 2018 or 2019 heroes that we get?
That's what I'm wondering, and I do wonder.
That's an interesting kind of idea of the kind of
idea of what heroism is in 2018.
Yeah, that the idea of selfless heroism.
This is the thing.
I just wondered. Now I haven't seen it yet, so I'm just throwing that out because I know you're.
Yeah, and I mean
something you would generally go into.
We thought about
7,000 words.
Well, we talked about this with Unicorn Store, and the idea of Unicorn Store being a film that sort of spoke to a modern idea of like what it's like to be a millennial, to live in a world where you won't own property.
And the 40-year-olds, like.
Yeah, and the idea that it has this resonance and it evokes that sort of culture. Yeah. I think what's interesting about the MCU, and I don't want to be too specific, and I also don't want to generalize, is that I think its idea of heroism is a weirdly, and again, I'm not using this term prejudicially. When I say millennial, I don't mean millennial generation. I mean of the millennium or of the 21st century. So I'm not referring to people when I talk about this.
And it's been a decade. So
it has been a decade as well.
Look what's happened in that 10 years.
And you have this idea of like this breakdown of community, and you have this idea of this breakdown of social bonds that people long accepted as being like necessary for the functioning of society. And you have this idea that people feel increasingly disconnected from their community, and you have this idea that people don't necessarily imagine themselves belonging to particular groups anymore. And I wonder if that's reflected in the aesthetics and choices that the Marvel films make with the characterization of their heroes. In particular, I'm thinking of the characterization of the superhero community as a class unto themselves, as a group of friends who are affected directly and primarily of themselves. And it's interesting, and again, I don't want to do this because this might end up kicking a hornet's nest, but you look at things like, for example, Richard Donner's Superman and its portrayal of Metropolis as a city that has its own vibrant infrastructure and its life outside of Superman. Or you look at things like, say, again, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, which part of what it does is it creates a comprehensive model of a city from the ground up, from the mayor to the police officers who are working the streets and stuff like that. And it creates an environment that feels real and tangible and lived in, where everything is connected to one another. And what's interesting to me about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and in particular, like the idea of this movie in particular, is how weirdly insular it all gets. Like, you think of the 4 Avengers movies. The villains in the 4 Avengers movies are Thor's evil brother, Tony's artificially created son, and then you have, like, you know, Thanos nominally, but again, like the idea that he's a single driving force, and also he's been set up as this vision that Tony's had of a nightmare coming true. Yeah. But you have this idea of, like, these intensely personal things. Like, you have, like, in Civil War, you have the fight at the airport, which is pointedly empty. It's just an empty space through which they can throw one another. Not to get too specific about Endgame, they make a choice at the end to have a confrontation in a space that is not anywhere that normal people are. Yeah. Now, you can argue that they do that in order to avoid the issues with, say, Batman versus Superman, of deaths and destruction, but it also serves to make it seem particularly confined, which is weird. Again, you're talking about a blockbuster with, like, the biggest cast of any blockbuster in living memory.
Yes. And that's kind of what I'm getting at.
And it's strange to think of that as a small...
But I guess what I'm thinking about is, and this is something for you both, because I haven't seen it yet, so this is only my kind of... And I've been thinking about this for a while in terms of kind of blockbusters now, is that in the kind of hot take culture and whatever that exists now in terms of, like, we need 100 articles on the film tomorrow because that's what happens. I think there might be a thing, and I'm getting at, because I said this, we've had this conversation before where I said I consider the Marvel Universe quite unique in the sense that it's done something that, for better or for worse, whether you like it or
everybody
not,
else has tried to do, and
and it's failed. Like, I mean, we've seen
the DCU explode. You've seen the shared monsters thing.
Like, it's extremely difficult to. It's a high wire act to keep it all.
And the management of it is absolutely superb.
And all that.
And again, like, I mean, we talked about how, like, even Infinity War, which I'm not overly fond,
No.
I am in awe of, like, in terms of, like, logistics.
Yeah, I know, even if you're not, but you can understand the
it's an
logistics.
incredible clockwork machine.
My point of it is, perhaps, and expanded on the kind of point I made earlier about the kind of the uniqueness of it, is that perhaps it needs about 5 or 10 years for it to breed and to see exactly where it shakes out in terms of, A, whether it's as good as the people that love it thinks it is, or B, whether the people are kind of cynical about it in terms of how it situates itself politically, how it situates itself in the blockbuster world, and how it sits in Hollywood and the kind of early 21st century. So
I mean, we've talked about this ourselves in terms of, like, needing that space. The idea that you should take 5 years before you declare anything a classic.
I'd be intrigued to see how people would see Endgame and Infinity War say as a double bill, or even the kind of throwaway ones, like Ant-Man or whatever.
I'm under no doubt this will be adored and loved. And
I'm not suggesting for a second I'm not that that nobody can. Like, I'm not saying your take is invalid because it's not 5 years later. I'm just saying it'll be intriguing to see how those films are seen.
And absolutely, and I suspect they'll be seen as classics, and people love them, and that's great. People seem to really, and it really connects with people. I mean, Grace talked about people sobbing at her screening. At the morning critics screening I went to, there were people sobbing, and that's great.
That's Donald Clark,
I know, he's just a soft spot right there. And that's fantastic, and it's amazing that those films touch people in those ways. They didn't for me, and that's a shame, but such is life.
All right, just curious.
Sorry, Grace.
No, I'm good.
All right, we'll wrap up. But in the meantime, people looking for more Jason a bit more Grace in their lives. I said almost
a bit more Grayson.
Grayson.
The double back that you never knew you needed.
Yeah.
If I'm still alive from this dastardly lurgy, at J Coyle on Twitter.
You can find me at Pixie Grace on Letterboxd.
You can follow me at Darren Mooney. I also host another podcast called The 250, where I even pronounce words properly on occasion. Yeah, I know. Radical departure. This week, we're joined by the wonderful Phil Bagnall, who is coming in to discuss the original Avengers in order to celebrate the weekend that's in there. Wow. Phil, we got him. It's quite a big catch. So the Avengers.
I want to hear that.
The original Avengers. The Avengers that everybody thinks about when you say the Avengers.
Yeah, the Avengers. The ones that I went to see in the cinema with Ray Fiennes and
Uma Thurman and Sean Connery.
He controls the weather. Oh God! Or flashbacks.
Now is the winter of your discontent.
Me and 3 other people sitting in the original Cineworld watching it. God, what a day!
It's quite an experience. I hadn't seen it before. It was
quite the
something.
Film, isn't it?
It is
quite the film.
And then next week, obviously, we'll be talking about Endgame, which is currently the 10th highest ranked movie of all time according to the IMDb.
Well, they'll know.
They will indeed.
They know people.
It
know
will
films.
Probably get higher than
anybody know films.
It's the IMDb crowd. Yep. I mean, what can we say, listeners? You can't see what Jay is doing at the moment, but I'll leave it to your imagination.
What?
Take it easy.
Sounds a lot ruder than it should have, Darren.
Take it easy. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Later.